Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories Podcast. I'm your host, John DeLynn. It's February 20th, 2025, and today we're answering the question of what happens when you feel like the Mormon Church or your high-demand religion is threatening your family, and you feel like you are faced with the question of church or family. Do you choose church over family or family over church? And how does that play out? We're so grateful to have with us today. So often, many of you ask that we just never stop interviewing just normal, average, everyday Mormons. And though none of us are purely average, that's what we have for you today is a normal Mormon couple. We bring to you today all the way from the Golden Gate City? What is San Francisco called?
I think Golden State Gate. City. Yeah. Golden.
Anyway, we have Kevin and Jennifer Lundquist. Hi, guys.
Hi.
Welcome to Mormon Stories.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. And of course, I'm joined today by my partner, Margie. Hey, Margie.
Hi there.
Thanks for joining us.
Yes.
All right. Well, it's an important theme because we believe that people should never have to choose between family and their faith.
Right.
But what happens when you feel like there are pressures in that regard? So before we jump into your stories, want to give you guys a chance to kind of share maybe an intention of why you felt like you wanted to share your Mormon story. And Kevin, I think you mentioned you want to start.
Yeah, so I think you captured it pretty well, John, that through various experiences that we've had, we felt like some of the experiences we've had with the church might resonate with members and people who are questioning their faith. And it came down to fundamentally times when the church tried to, I don't like to use the word bully us, but maybe strong arm us into various actions or decisions. And I think a little bit about because of my upbringing, I was kind of taught at a very young age to not allow people to bully you and not to, and so I stood up for certain things and Jen did too, and we can kind of go into some of those stories.
What do you hope comes out of this interview? What outcome were you hoping for?
Hopefully to be able to, as we share some of our stories and things that we've had to make decisions on, that people who maybe are going through the same thing that we went through, namely with navigating the church with a gay son and some other things like that, and some of the choices we've made, that maybe it'll resonate with people who have not gone down that or are going down that road. Because I feel like largely when we went through it very alone. We had no support. Mormon Stories was kind of in its infancy, and I think the CES letter had just come out, and so we kind of navigated it on our own and didn't really know how that was going to end up. And so hopefully we can resonate some of our stories and stuff in the way we handled it. Whether people stay in the church or leave the church, that's not as important as some of the things that we'll talk about when we were going through some of these things. We were very active. I think I was Elders Quorum president. She was Young Women's president, and maybe being able to help some people that have gone through it before and make decisions that we made that we didn't know if it was the right decision, but it ended up being the right decision in the end.
I heard a report today on the news that 1 in 10 Americans now are identifying as LGBTQ. And the younger generations, I think it can be high as 20%.
Mm-hmm. I believe it.
So if an average Mormon family has 4 kids,
right,
there's like a greater than 50% chance they're going to have at least one LGBT kid.
Well, and we have 2.
Yeah, you
two
have
of
2.
our 3.
Yeah. Jennifer, did you want to add anything to the intention before we jump in?
I think Kevin mostly did. To me, family is everything, whether it's the family we've created or our predecessors before us, so, and I feel like, that's the big thing is family. And it's,
Yeah, okay. All right. Well, let's just briefly touch on each of your Mormon upbringings just at a super high level. We've almost done 2,000 episodes now. So give us like the 1 to 2 minute version of your Mormon upbringing. And of course, if there's something that's really critical to your story, we want to make sure and give you a chance to mention it. So, Kevin, who's older?
I am.
All right, you want to start, Kevin?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
I can go through it in 1 minute. I grew up in Los Angeles, and I had 2 very active parents. My dad was in the bishopric most of the time that I was growing up. My mom was Young Women's president, Relief Society president, primary president, everything. So we were, the expectation was we go to church, but my parents weren't hardcore. Like, we'd come home from church and I'd go play with all my friends, and my parents would take a nap, and, we'd go to primary and we were active. The only difference in my upbringing was I grew up in Los Angeles during the busing era. And so where they thought it was a good idea to integrate the public schools. So I went to racially, yeah. So I went to a public school that was middle class. We were by no means any more than a middle class family. And we were bused into a, South Central Los Angeles school where we had an English and Spanish teacher. And the outcome of that was it didn't integrate kids to be friends. You spent your recesses and lunch fighting. And so I learned at a very early age to kind of stand up for myself, protect myself. And that was kind of the way I think I learned to navigate through life. Not in a bad way, but that was something that had a big impression on me growing up. But as far as my LDS upbringing, my parents were, I was raised by very good people, very good parents. Nothing, until I moved to Utah, I had no issues with anything in terms of, I remember my bishop growing up, very nice man, very kind. I was a little bit on the edge. I had my ears pierced. I had longer hair. And in California, that played out very well.
Were you like into skateboarding or surfing or any of that kind of stuff?
I was a skater.
Okay.
Yeah. I guess you'd consider me kind of a rocker, although I didn't really, and I'll go through a couple of experiences when I moved to Utah. I didn't really identify with any one group, but in California, having long hair and pierced ears, nobody really cared. My bishop let me pass the sacrament, let me bless the sacrament, whatever. He just didn't really care. He was more looking at, what kind of individual are you, and are you kind of following the rules?
Would you say that through graduating high school, you had a positive Mormon experience? Jennifer's laughing.
Sorry.
So
he was here. He was in Utah for high school.
Halfway through.
For part of high school.
Okay.
Yeah.
So pre-Utah, how was your Mormon experience?
Good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anything worth mentioning?
No.
Okay.
Nothing.
So you move here, your junior year in high school?
Yep.
Which high school?
Brighton.
Ooh. That's just right down the road.
Yeah. No, it was actually my sophomore year. I moved here my sophomore year. Yeah.
And then did something change in terms of the church or your family or you?
Yeah, a little bit.
Did you cut your hair or did you keep your long hair? Jennifer's laughing again.
Let's get to the really
hair
important.
Is the crux
did
of
you
life.
Cut your hair?
No. So I'll share my first experience that was kind of my first experience with how members of the church can be. Mm-hmm. So I moved to Utah. I hadn't taken early morning seminary in California just because I didn't want to get up and do it.
You have release time in Utah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I move here.
Which means you go during your high school classes.
Right. And I wanted to take advantage of that. I moved here. I didn't really have an opinion one way or another of the church. My parents moved us here because of the environment in LA and all that. And we were starting to get in a little trouble, especially my sister. So we moved here and I thought, well, I'll take seminary. Why not? It's during, it's one class I don't have to take. So I enrolled in seminary.
An academic class you don't have to take.
Yeah. I was kind of excited about it actually. So I show up to seminary the first day and I sit through, and I guess I can say his name, Brother Tate. He's this little small man that taught, and they were teaching doctrine and covenants. So I sat through the first class and I got up and walked out, and he came and caught me in the hall and he said, "Hey, Brother Lundquist, just want to let you know that your hair's not appropriate for my class." And I said, "Okay, duly noted, thanks." And he said, and that was all he said. So I left, didn't even think twice about it. Come back the next day, and he catches me after, and he said, "I thought I told you your hair wasn't appropriate for my class." And I said, "You did."
Wow.
And he said, "No, it's not a missionary standard." And I said, "I'm 15, I'm not a missionary. And he said, well, I want you to cut your hair before you come back to class.
Whoa.
Wow.
And I said, my bishop is okay with it. My dad's okay with it. I think it's up to them and not up to you. And he said, well, I've told you what my expectation is. I said, okay. So I walked across the campus and went to the admissions office, and I told the admissions counselor, I said, I need to drop seminary. And she said, why? And I told her, and she's like, oh my gosh, really? And she's like, I can try to put you in another class. And I said, no, I don't. I'm done. I'm done with seminary. And so it was, and I didn't leave that as a bitter experience. It was just like, whatever, I don't really care. And so I took a weightlifting class, but it was a weightlifting class with all the athletes, football players and all that. And it actually turned out really good. I'm this 6'1", 135-pound guy that, they have to move all the weights off for me to do my weights.
The bar, basically.
Yeah, one small plate and the bar. But I actually became friends with a lot of the football players, the quarterback, and some of them became my good friends in high school. And it was nice to not have to put myself in any one category. So I had friends that were skaters. I had friends that were, I don't know what you'd call them, punks, I guess, punk rockers or whatever. And I had jock friends. And so it was actually a good integration. But I went home and I told my dad, and he was not happy. He was like, I'm going back to that school. They don't tell my kid what to do. At that point, I was living the gospel. I wasn't doing anything wrong.
Yeah.
And I told him, I'm like, no, because the worst case scenario, you're going to go back and you're going to get me back in that class. And I don't want to sit there with this guy.
Yeah.
And so I never went back to seminary again.
And then how did your testimony survive high school? Or did it?
It did. I wasn't super active. I kind of went into the more skater, like, I think the jocks liked me because I could get them weed and stuff like that. So, and I wasn't.
Wait, people smoked weed in Utah?
Oh, yeah.
What?
Oh, yeah.
Haven't you heard Brighton is where you get the drugs?
What? No, I
Weed.
didn't.
No, just weed.
No, but that's what we at Hillcrest used to say is Brighton can afford drugs.
And around what year did you graduate high school?
85.
85.
85.
So it's in the 80s. They're smoking weed at Brighton High School. I had no idea.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So you were the supplier to the football team. Anything else you want to say before we...
No, high school was pretty normal.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you end up serving a mission?
I did.
How'd you get on a mission from a weed smoking hippie, basically? Skater hippie.
So
He looked like a rocker.
yeah, I had long hair, and I was dating a girl that I did deviate from the church. I wasn't a choir boy in high school. I had a couple of friends that were female, and I started dating this girl that was a cheerleader at BYU, and I really liked her, and I knew that her kind of, she wasn't going to marry me if I didn't serve a mission. And I'd started coming back into the church a little bit because I was pretty inactive. And I went to my bishop, who, he was okay, but he wasn't my favorite guy. He was kind of black and white, and I'll explain why that matters later. But he says, well, you have to go through the repentance process to get on a mission. I said, all right, fine. I'll go through that. And he says, well, it's a 6-month process. And I had to meet with the stake president, and the stake president said, well, there's one more hoop you have to go through to go on a mission because you've been not a perfect angel. And he says, you have to go meet with the general authority.
Yeah, back in the day, if you had sex before your mission, you had to meet with the general authority before you could go on your mission.
Yeah. So
I don't think it's still that way, but it was then. Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
So I made a request to my stake president because I had always liked Paul Dunn growing up. I'd always, listen to his stories and stuff. And I said, well, could I meet him? And he's like, well, I don't know. I'll see.
You can pick your celebrities.
Exactly.
It's like a reward instead of a punishment.
Well, so he calls me back and he goes, yeah, Elder Dunn will meet with you.
Huh.
I was like, okay. So I went and met with him, and, whatever people think about him, that's fine. He was extremely kind to me.
Yeah.
He was, and I'll go into why, the influence he had on she and I later and stuff. But I went in there all scared about, oh my gosh, I'm going to get grilled. And I spent an hour with him, and he was at the church administration office. This was before all the fallout, and he'd been pushed to emeritus status. But
After?
Before.
Oh, before.
Before.
Okay, yeah.
So he was still a general authority. He was in the administration building on on the floor with some of the apostles. And he spent about an hour with me talking about, like, what are your life goals? What are you going to do in college? What are you going to do? You go on your mission and all that. And do you want to go internationally? And I was like, yes, I really want to go overseas. And he's like, okay. And at the end, he said, he said, I'm not going to ask you any questions. I just want to know if you feel like you've repented and can you serve a mission for the Savior with a clean spirit. And I said, yes. And he said, okay. That's all I need to know.
Wow.
You're making me wish I had had sex before my mission, basically. That sounds like a cool experience.
The important part, and met with Paul Dunn.
Well, or the general authority of my choice.
Right, of your choice, right.
Choose your general authority.
And so I left, and he wrote me a couple times on my mission.
That's
and
so
they
cool.
were genuine, genuine letters that, they weren't very long.
That's
and I think it was
lovely.
only 3 times. But he specifically told me, he goes, when you get home, I want you to come meet with me. And so I served my mission in Cape Town, South Africa.
For those who don't know, it's just worth mentioning that once upon a time, Paul H. Dunn was probably the most popular general authority in the Mormon Church because he was a fantastic, charismatic storyteller. And if you walked into any of the church bookstores, Deseret Book, there'd be a whole wall of cassette tapes of different stories Paul H. Dunn talked about about his career as a professional baseball player and about his service in World War II.
Yep.
And when I was at BYU, a feisty reporter discovered that a lot of the inspiring stories that Paul H. Dunn was telling, that he was, selling all these tapes about, weren't actually true. That
Right.
he didn't really serve in the wars he claimed to serve in the ways he claimed to serve. He didn't really play Major League Baseball. And Lynn Packer was the reporter, and we've actually done a few episodes on Mormon Stories about Paul H. Dunn that are really worth checking out. Mm-hmm. But I'll say, everyone I've talked to that actually met him and got to know him said he was an amazing, kind, smart, thoughtful,
Absolutely.
progressive leader.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of a paradox. And the only other thing I heard is that by no stretch was he the only general authority that told tall tales as a general authority, but that maybe one of the reasons why he was railroaded and turned into emeritus status was because some of the other church leaders were jealous of his popularity. So anyway, I don't mean to sort of get us sidetracked, but every year there's a whole new cohort of people that don't know any of these stories. And I just go dig up stuff on Paul Dunn, go read the Sunstone articles on Paul Dunn, go listen to our episodes, go read Lynn Packer's book about Paul Dunn. Yeah. It's fascinating. Anyway, do y'all agree? Is that okay? Do y'all agree with that?
Absolutely. I can tell you one more story when I got home.
Okay,
I served a mission, and I didn't have a testimony. I just went because my mom was one of those, my only son won't go on a mission, I'm a failure.
You said South Africa, right?
South Africa.
That's cool. That was
great.
That's apartheid kind of South Africa.
It was apartheid.
Yeah.
I actually took a Book of Mormon I was serving in the area where Nelson Mandela was in prison, and I took a Book of Mormon.
Wow.
And I don't know if he ever got it. I obviously never met him, but I met him later in life, actually, through something, but I didn't meet him then. I left a Book of Mormon for him. I don't know if he ever got it. It was in his Xhosa native tongue. But it was a good experience. My mission president was not a typical mission president. He was really, really a good man. He inspired me to be better. I had a couple experiences on my mission where I realized I didn't know anything about the church, and it put me at a real disadvantage with investigators. And so in high school, I wasn't the best student and barely graduated. And I got on my mission, and I kind of got humiliated in a discussion with someone my first week. And I promised that would never, ever happen again. And so I spent hours studying. I mean, I would stay up till 2 in the morning studying the scriptures. I read all 4 standard works. I read Articles of Faith, Jesus the Christ, everything. And that taught me a discipline that I think I took with the rest of my life to study and stuff like that. But it was a really good experience for me. My mission was, and my mission president was he's just like, here's the rule, here's certain rules you can't break. Everything else is up for negotiation. And so, and interesting enough, he died a couple years ago and lived about 60 miles from us. So we went to his funeral, and it was just, it was a celebration of a man who he was just a really good guy. He really was.
Were you allowed to teach and baptize black people in your mission?
Yes.
Or was that discouraged?
Nope.
Okay.
Nope. I served in one of the first black areas called Mtara, which is it's a centralized, self-contained state within South Africa. And I spent about 6 months there teaching only black people. And it was okay to do it in those stakes or in those wards, but in the white Afrikaner wards, they weren't accepted. They don't want black people coming in.
So the Mormon white Afrikaner wards did not want black converts brought into their wards.
No, and it was just it's hard to explain if you don't understand the dynamics of apartheid. Black people really were viewed as second-class citizen. It wasn't like the civil rights here. It was way worse. Yeah. And so you couldn't really fault them for it, although in certain wards where we did convert black people into the white wards, they tried to integrate them and they tried to do the right thing. It's just the cultural differences were so different that it was hard for them. So I don't fault the people of South Africa for that. It's just kind of the way it was.
The culture.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I have a quick follow-up with regard to your high school years, where you were talking about how, let's just say you maybe differentiated from the church a little bit, had some distance from. Is that how you would kind of talk about it?
Yeah, I was largely inactive. I didn't go to church a lot.
So during that time, how did your parents approach that differentiation? Did you still behavior-wise show up in a way that, was, let's just say, in line with your family system and your parents, or did you differentiate? And then what was your experience of, let's just say, feeling valued and loved by your parents as you did so?
Yeah. So I had a sister who had a lot of problems, mm-hmm. way more problems than I had. And so my parents spent a lot of time dealing with her.
Okay, they were focused on, is this an older
pregnancy,
sister?
Yeah, 2 years older.
Okay.
High school pregnancy, drugs, all kinds of stuff, getting arrested. And so everything I did kind of paled in comparison, and I kind of flew under the radar a little bit.
Okay, I see.
But I never had a disconnect relationship with my parents.
Okay, so they still stayed emotionally connected to you during that time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's really something.
Like even my dad, and my dad was my best friend forever, and he found out some of the stuff I was doing, and mm-hmm. he just told me once, he said, I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm not going to try to govern your life. But he said, with these friends, just don't get anybody pregnant, because we just lived through it with my sister.
Oh, right.
And he's like, I don't care what else you do. And the other stipulation is like, you have to graduate from high school.
Yeah.
I don't care what else you do.
Yes.
You have to graduate from high school. And I said, I will graduate from high school, and I will not get in trouble in that regard. But my relationship with my parents never deteriorated. I've always gone along with my parents. They've always been super supportive through everything that we've done in life. So
a little bit of a family first approach from your parents.
Exactly.
Would you say as well?
Yeah. I think
if his mom doesn't go to the celestial kingdom, no one will.
No.
Yeah.
They both were very amazing.
Yeah.
I think they kind of took the attitude that eventually, he'll work through whatever he's got to work through and he'll come back, which I did when I was a teenager.
Yeah.
And I wasn't doing anything. I wasn't getting arrested. I smoked weed, and I think they knew that, but it wasn't like a central focus of my life, and I didn't do any other drugs.
Yeah.
So I wasn't, and I wasn't drinking. I was just, and I played in a band, and I worked, and school just wasn't the high priority, and church wasn't the high priority. I wasn't like against the church or anything. It was
you just had a very full life.
It just wasn't a priority.
Got it. Yeah.
So by the time your mission's over, how strong is your testimony?
Super strong.
Okay. So you were in it to win it at that point.
Oh yeah. I was full in. I totally converted myself on my mission. And I think I knew I could argue or debate or talk with anybody about, I knew more about Joseph Smith than I thought anybody did because I read everything. And my mission president was a really good example for me because he was a scriptorian. He had a photographic memory. He could read something and quote it, but not in a way that was like condescending. He was just very good about teaching and really, really kind of brought that out on me. I even told him, I said, I don't obey all the mission rules. I stay up till 12, 1 o'clock in the morning studying, and sometimes I don't get up till 8. And he's like, I don't really care what you do.
Can we just note that? Because I do feel like with both your parents and your mission president, you had adults or people in authority over you that actually had an approach that was like, okay, but here are a couple things that we really care about, and then the rest we're going to just let you be human with.
Right.
And that feels very rare.
Yeah.
And, can we just call out that approach as something that is rarer and appreciate it?
Yeah, and one of the things I remember about my mission president, because I served most of my mission on the coast, and I lived in an area where, and I'm a runner, I've always been a runner, where we lived right on the Indian Ocean. I mean, right on. And I said to my mission president, I said, I'll go running up and down the coast to run in the morning, and I'll sometimes jump in the water. And he said, don't do that. And I said, really? He's like, no. He's like, that's one rule I'm going to tell you, do not go in the water. And he said, it's not because Satan has control of the water or anything like that. He said, if there's an accident, I don't want to have to call your parents and tell them that I allowed you to violate the rules and you died because of it.
And there were missionaries on my mission that died on the lake.
Yep.
So, I mean, there's...
And so when he said something like that, I respected it. I'm like, okay. And I would tell him, is it okay if I run and splash up to my knees and stuff? He's like, yeah, as long as you're not swimming or doing anything that's going to risk you.
Very reasonable.
Oh, absolutely reasonable.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing by the end of your mission, you would have said it was probably the most important thing you did in your life up to that point?
It was, because it helped, like when I graduated from high school, I graduated with a 2.0. I barely graduated. And I think I learned a lot of the things on my mission that helped me when right after I got home from my mission, I went on to college and I graduated with almost a 4.0.
Where'd you go?
University of Utah.
Okay. What'd you study?
Accounting and finance.
Did you do the institute there?
Nope.
Didn't do the institute.
No.
How'd you stay? Did you join the Greeks? How'd you stay on the straight and narrow?
Yeah,
Okay.
He followed the mission rule of get married right away.
Okay. All right. That's where we segue. Jennifer, tell us quickly about your Mormon story.
Mine is much less fascinating.
I wouldn't say that.
No, it was, I had great parents that were also in the church. They weren't the type that said no caffeine. I mean, when we had neighbors that had a headache, they'd come to our house to get a Coke to help their headache. And, after church, we'd get in the car, go to Baskin-Robbins, and go for a ride in the mountains.
On Sunday, you'd go to Baskin-Robbins?
We
That's
would do
awesome.
that.
Y'all both had cool parents, basically.
My parents were amazing. I mean, their best friends on our streets were the Catholics, so they taught us early that you don't have to be Mormon to be a good person. And this was in Utah. I mean, if you're not in Utah, I think that's more of a normal mindset. But
in Utah,
people are like, well, if I had one. A lot of people are like, oh, if you hang out with the non-Mormons, they're going to get you to drink and do drugs and have sex. And my parents didn't have that attitude. My mom always said, we're teaching you what we feel is right, and you're either going to follow it or not follow it.
Was this Murray area? Or?
No, I grew up in Sandy. Our parents are actually in the same ward, but he got to go to Brighton High School, and I went to Hillcrest High School.
Her dad was in the bishopric when I served my mission, so he would write me little notes on my once in a while.
Yeah.
And so I knew her parents.
Yeah.
And I was the girl in the ward that all the mothers wanted their sons to marry, but none of the sons were interested in.
Oh.
Because I was the typical Molly Mormon. I did lunch seminary because I had too many classes, and then I was on seminary council.
You're talking about it like it's droll and drab.
I know, right? I was the young adult rep in our ward when he got home from his mission.
You were also my mom's home teacher, visiting teacher.
She would visit me.
Oh.
Yeah.
Because I got home from my mission and I was dating the same girl that was a cheerleader, and my mom was like, oh, you need to date this Jennifer Ball. I'm like, and I met her once. I was like, no. So,
And here we are.
yeah.
So I'm hearing committed.
Yeah.
From you.
I
And
was
I'm hearing-
I never deviated from the straight and narrow at all.
Yeah, and also excellence in there.
Well, I tried. I definitely was in, full on testimony. My prayers every night were, please help my family make it to the celestial kingdom for families only. I mean, that was always my top priority. I'm going there.
Yeah.
So, and I was going to do whatever it took to get there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you enjoy your Mormon upbringing? Like, it
I
sounds
really
like you were
did.
doing all the things.
I really did. And again, I credit my parents to having me have a diversified friendship base. Like, I had a friend that was a Protestant, and she said that her parents loved her to be friends with the Mormons because they did the good things. And then, like, my best friend in high school was a total slut. I remember
What? Can't say
she
that.
had her eyes set on this guy.
She sexually explored.
Very,
That's what she says about me too. So just so you know.
But she had her sights set on a guy that I had dated the year before, and she's like, "Oh, he's so cute." And I'm like, he has a goal of going on a mission, and if you do anything to ruin that, we will not be friends anymore. She's like, "Okay, I respect that. Duly noted."
He'll have to meet a general authority.
Huh?
He'll have to meet a general
right,
authority
he
if
will.
you mess with him.
Yeah. So, I definitely, like I said, I did all the things, went to Young Women's every week. The only thing I wouldn't do is church camp. I did that once year, and it was miserable, and so I never went back. But
Yeah.
So any big sort of conflict or drama in your Mormon story
No.
up until, okay.
no, I lived the typical Utah Mormon life.
So why would you go to Satan's University, the University of Utah?
Because my parents have red blood, and they taught me that way. I actually did get accepted to BYU, but when it came down to it, I was like, why am I spending the money to go down there when I can just live at home and go to the University of Utah
Because
and
it's the
have my
Lord's
parents love
University.
me?
Because it's the
Right.
Lord's University.
That's right.
Right, Margie?
But I did go to Institute. I was involved in the LDS sorority up there.
Okay.
So-
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, University of Utah, for those who don't know, has sororities and fraternities. BYU doesn't. They have clubs, but it's just not the same. So Greek life.
Yeah. It
What
was
was your
basically-
sorority?
It was Lambda Delta Sigma. Wait, no, that's the whole thing. That's LDS. It was Alpha Theta Chi, sorry.
Okay.
And what are they known for? The Alpha. Do you remember?
I honestly don't remember,
Yeah.
but I felt like that the sorority was basically Young Women's on a bigger level.
Oh,
I
really?
mean, yeah, we'd go to activities, and there was usually some kind of little lesson before we'd have fun.
Okay.
But
All right. Okay. Okay. Well, that was fast. I don't want to give your. Did you feel like you had a super strong testimony?
I did. Yeah.
Okay.
And I mean, I'd had some very significant spiritual experiences, especially in high school and mostly high school. But yeah, I mean,
Okay.
When you went to the U, were you thinking that would you say that you were ambitious and driven to get an education?
Oh, yes.
For an education's sake, or okay.
my mom is very, very feminine. I don't want to say feminist like in the negative, but she was very, you need to know how to support yourself.
Yeah.
If you do get married, you don't know if your husband's going to be able to support you. I mean, so she was like, you need to get your college education. I was in middle school or high school by the time my mom got her degree. And she had been a stay-at-home mom, and there were things with my brother's health that caused her to be like, I need to get back into the workforce. And so, she led by example.
Right.
And
Yep.
yeah, so and she's like, you need to get your degree. Don't be like me and get it afterwards, which I failed to fulfill. I got my degree when my youngest was 4 or 3.
Yeah, but you did what you wanted.
But
so.
I did what I wanted, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So is there anything about your courtship, your marriage, or your early marriage years that are kind of really important to the story?
Well, so I got home, and I went and saw Paul H. Dunn, and I was dating this girl, a cheerleader at BYU, really, really sweet. And I said to him,
She waited for you.
waited. Yeah, kind of.
She dated?
I didn't tell her.
In
to
other
wait.
words, she didn't get married.
No.
Right.
Okay.
No, and we started dating, and she was from American Fork, big family. I would go to their dinners, and they'd be like, "Why are you wasting time with education? We work at Hercules and make $12 an hour, and we're making money." And
What's Hercules?
I think it was a mining company down in
It's a big thing down there because my uncle and cousin both worked for Hercules.
I think it's the mines,
well.
the mines and the.
Yeah.
And so I said to Elder Dunn, I said, I want to travel the world. I have all these goals. And he said, I think your heart is telling you that that's never going to happen with this girl. Because I told her that, and she's like, well, I don't want to move. I want Sunday dinners with my family of 20 people. And so I ended up breaking up with her. And it was amicable, and we stayed friends. As a matter of fact, a year later, she called me and said she was going on a mission and wanted me to come to her farewell. So we did. But I wasn't looking for a wife. She wasn't looking for a husband, but we ended up meeting and started dating. And I think the only thing that was really significant is that same bishop was pretty hardcore with me. I don't think he liked me. And so, we're dating, we're engaged now, and we're trying to make sure that we can go to the temple. And that was both our goals. And we were struggling, and but not anything more than I think most couples do. But my bishop was like, if you pet, you're not going to the temple. You're going to deny her a temple marriage. If you do this, and I was like stressed about it. So we went in and saw Paul Dunn, and he had told me, he goes, when you find that right person, I'd love to seal you in the temple. So we went in and talked to him, and he goes, how's it going? And I kind of told him, I'm like, we're struggling a little bit. And he's like, let me tell you this. He's like, God doesn't expect you guys to go from holding hands the morning you wake up, get married, and then having sex. He's like, he knows you're going to do stuff. And I was like, okay.
You're like, this is a different version?
No,
it was from my bishop, by the way.
It was so amazing because I felt so bad and so guilty. And we weren't doing anything crazy, but I said, okay, can you elaborate on that? And he said, yeah. When I was a bishop, if I had a couple that was getting ready to go to the temple that had gone up to and beyond oral sex, he said, then I would deny them the temple. And he says, but up until then, he's like, God doesn't expect you guys to, just go from holding hands. And that kind of took all the guilt away, because I was like, okay, we can live within those boundaries. That's fine. No big deal. And then I went, and we did. And I felt like when we went to the temple, I felt like we were in a good place.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
It is interesting.
Yeah. I have to say, and I had a different experience with our bishop than he did, because he was a family friend. He always treated me well. But the one thing that he did that bothered me is when we would have those interviews, he would always blame Kevin. Like, you're going to ruin this, as if I was a non-participant.
Right.
Ever. Of course I would be pristine and wonderful, but he would be awful.
Interesting.
And that's one thing that really bothered me.
Yeah, I get that.
But I still love the guy. Like I said, he's a family friend.
Why did that bother you?
It bothered me because it was not giving me any ownership for my own actions. It takes two to tango, as they say. And so why would it be his fault if we did do something wrong?
Yeah. And it's kind of too, like, you're devoid of sexual feeling. Like, clearly you know what I mean? There's an assumption there.
Right.
Yeah.
So I went back to the bishop and I just said, we talked to Elder Dunn about it, and we're talking to him about it, and we're good. And he never said another word. And so, it was a special day for us, though, because we met him in the temple, and all of our family was in. We had the biggest ceiling room you can find, and we're walking down the hall to get into the ceiling room, and he meets us in the hall, and he says, "Come with me," and he takes us up into the celestial room, and talks for about 15 minutes about the church and the significance of the temple. But then he starts giving us counsel about, you guys are going to get engulfed in your, school and family and all that. And he said, don't lose sight of each other. And he said, I remember when we were early on married that, my wife and I didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. And we fell into that category. And he said, we would find ways to date that didn't cost anything. We would go up in the mountains and go for a hike, or we'd go look at the stars up in the mountains. And that was really good advice for us, because we did get engulfed in that. Each of us had jobs. We were full-time school. We had our first son the start of my senior year. And so it was a good experience. And he sealed us, and then he left, and that was the last time we ever saw him.
Really?
Do you, it wouldn't have been much after that he would have been exposed as...
It was when I was on my mission.
Oh, so he sealed you after he had been made emeritus.
Yep.
Did you know about that? Had you heard about that on your mission? Mm-hmm. And did that affect you?
No, not at all.
Because he had been kind to you.
He'd just been so kind. And when we got home, he was working a job in I think it was an investment company. I don't know what exactly he was doing, but we'd go meet with him in his office, and he was just genuine and nice and kind. And at least as we were going through it, when he sealed us in the temple and was talking to us in the temple, I felt like, I felt like he was a genuinely kind person that cared about us, and whatever he'd done, I've always, up to that point, believed that nobody's perfect, and he's done enough good that whatever wrongs he's done will be offset. And I just go on based on the experience that we had with him, which was very good.
I love how those moments of care, true care, that you experience within a system, how deeply meaningful they can be.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, we left that with a very good experience. And, I have a crazy aunt that came from California to our wedding just because he was sealing us. He was like a rock star to her. Yeah. And he was very kind to her, and sweet. Very, very nice to her, and very nice to our family, and just good experience.
That's great. So he didn't mention any of that scandal to you?
We didn't talk about it. I didn't.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I didn't really want to know.
Yeah.
I knew about it, but I didn't really. Yeah. And my mission president said something about it, and he's like, don't believe everything you hear. Go based on what your experience has been with him, and because my mission president knew him. Oh. And when I got my call, I went and saw him and told him where I was going. He's like, "Oh, Reed Snow, he's the best mission president you'll ever have."
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So he at least knew of him. I don't know if they were best friends or anything, but they knew of each other. Nice. Yeah.
All right. Anything else about your courtship or early marriage that's worth mentioning?
I don't think so.
No. How were those early years as a devout Mormon couple?
I felt like we had some great experiences. Like we were, of course, in the student ward. I shouldn't say of course. Okay, we were living in the University Village, so we were in a student ward, and we had the opportunity to spend, was it 6 months at the hospital? Mm-hmm. Yeah, they had us have a calling where we would go do the sacrament for the people at the hospital. And I felt like, we wouldn't have gotten that experience had we been anywhere else. But I thought that I wish we could have done it longer. That was an amazing experience. Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that we would do is they would have us go into the psych ward at the University of Utah, which was pretty serious. I mean, it's behind locked doors and everything. And we'd go there and we'd meet with people that were struggling with their mental health significantly. And I think it just taught us a lot of compassion. It's like, I don't care what their situation is. We're providing the sacrament for them. And, we'd sit there and talk to them for a little while. And there were other people that had been in there. I remember this one guy that he had brain surgery. He wasn't in the psych ward, but he was in the hospital. And he was there for quite a while. And we kind of became friends with him. He looked forward to us coming every week. And it was such a deviation because we would go, the branch there at the University of Utah would have, they'd wheel people in, or the people that could go to church would come to church. But it was very small. It was like 20 minutes. It was very quick. You have the sacraments, usually the district president or branch president would say a few words, and then you leave, and we would go to the people who couldn't come to church and give them the sacrament. And that was what we did it was longer than, it was probably the better part of a year we did that.
Oh yeah, it was
and so
a year,
we never went to a normal church or normal, sacrament, young women's, young men's. We just went to the University of Utah and spent the time at the ward, and that was really good. We really enjoyed that.
When y'all got married, what was the either explicit or implied agreement as to the major milestones you would achieve or seek to achieve in your life? Kind of how your life would play out. Does that make sense?
Yeah. We both had education goals. Mine was, I either wanted to go to law school or I wanted to do an MBA and go in the corporate world, which is what I've done. And so I think she was doing an accounting degree, and then worked for a CPA firm and just hated it, and came home one day and said, "I'm quitting. I'm not doing this anymore."
Well, part of that though is at this time. This is before the CPA firm. I don't think I told him all of my reasonings, but I was working for a home health care company at the administrative office, and there were nurses there, and so I would hear their stories. And I thought, I think I really want to do that. And then, when I started working at the accounting firm, I'm like, I think I need to switch tracks to the nursing.
Good for you.
Yeah.
So education. What else would be Mormon milestones for your family?
Mormon milestones.
Mormon
I don't feel like I had any. It was just to float along. I mean, I know that they feel.
Wait,
I feel like in the
kids?
church.
Kids?
We had kids. We knew we wanted kids.
That's what I mean. Like church attendance. Like
Yeah, and we dragged our baby to church just like every other new parents.
Yeah.
Got them blessed and.
Callings.
We moved
was
to
it
I didn't care
acceptable
what
calling?
callings I would have. I know that Mormonville, if you make it to Elders Quorum president or Young Women's president or whatever, you're wonderful. I didn't have those goals. Yes, I did achieve. I did become women's president and the primary presidency and stuff, but those were my goals.
But I mean, were you both committed to lifelong membership?
Oh yeah. Again, I'm dragging my family to Celestial Kingdom.
Okay.
We're going to be up there if it kills us.
We moved to Sandy after I graduated. I got a job before I did my MBA, and we moved to Sandy, and I was probably 25, and I was the youngest one in the ward by years, and I got called to be Elders Quorum president, which was an interesting. I remember our stake president, who was like as black and white as you can get, and later became a general authority because that's what he wanted. And he called me, and it was Boyd K. Packer's son, Alan Packer, and him. And they called me, and they're like, I thought they were going to just call me to some silly calling. And he's like, we'd like to call you to be Elders Quorum president of the ward. I said, are you sure you got this one right? And they did not flinch. They just looked at me, and they said, we take this very serious. I was like, okay. And so I was called to be Elders Quorum president. And when he came in and talked about Elders Quorum president, he's like, well, Thomas Monson was called to be a bishop at 22, and Kevin's 25, and he'll probably be the next bishop of the ward and all that. And it sounded good, but I was just like, I didn't really care as much about callings as we had. Like, we had global aspirations. We wanted to go around the world. We wanted to do stuff. We wanted to, do stuff with our careers and stuff. And we always just thought the church would fit in with that, however well it fit in.
I mean, honestly, the healthy upbringing that you both seem to have as Mormons would seem to sort of set you up to have what I think is the ideal Mormon experience, which I often say this, which is religion is like the salt to the meal. It's not the meal.
Right.
Yes.
Does that resonate with you?
I think so, yeah.
So it's a framework to help you live a full life. It's not, Mormonism isn't your life.
Right.
It's a framework for your life.
Yes.
Right.
Is that how it was?
Yeah, I think that is exactly perfect way to put it.
Yeah.
I think that's Mormonism at its best, honestly.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
So when you got married, something that you shared was this desire to live, like have a global experience as opposed to like a very
I was along for the ride with him. My mom had moved away from her parents to come to Utah for school, so I knew that I would be leaving my parents. So I was fully on board with whatever he wanted to do.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
I'd kind of told her that I wanted to do some stuff that might, in finance and I had career aspirations and she was all on board. She's like, I don't care, whatever, we'll go wherever.
yeah, as long as he was there and I had kids, I didn't care.
How would you describe yourselves with regard to roles? Were you in distinct roles? Were they blurry? Did you do your own thing?
In terms of like
Gender roles?
Gender roles.
Oh.
Yeah,
those started phasing a little bit because by the time we were in our first house, he was working on his master's degree at the same time. And I had a second shift job so that I could be with the kids most of the time. So I started doing some of the male roles like mowing the lawn. And let's be honest, I'm better at building furniture than he is. I actually think
She's
it's
a better
fun.
handyman than I am.
Yeah, I actually think it's fun to work out those problems. They're puzzles to me. So, and he would help with the dishes and help with the kids. I mean, part of what attracted me to him is watching him play around with his nephews. So, I mean, he would, be great taking care of the kids. Once I let go of the fact that no one's as wonderful as I am, I realized he was great.
Right.
Because you know how it is as a mom. You're like, it has to be my way or the highway. And then I realized his way was equally as wonderful.
Yeah. So I'm kind of hearing that from the beginning, you kind of, really did your own thing a little bit with gender roles.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think there was ever it's funny because my mom and dad were very, like, my dad was the breadwinner. My mom stayed home. My dad was kind of the disciplinarian, not like hardcore or anything, but that shifted a lot when I became a teenager to where he started, because I wasn't real close to my dad until I was a teenager.
Yeah.
And then we started to be coming very close. And so I think, because he was brought up in I'm the dad, the mom is the nurturer, the dad, and he kind of broke that mold a little bit as I became a teenager. And like I said, became my absolute best friend. And so I kind of blurred those roles too. I didn't see that there was, I finished my MBA, and right after that we moved to the Midwest, and she got into nursing school.
And then he became the mom.
And we had 2 kids, and we were in the process of adopting our daughter from China. And so I had, a full-time job. I was traveling all over, and I was helping her because she wasn't working. She was full-time nursing school. And so I had to do the dishes. I had to vacuum. I had to clean the house. I had to take care of the kids and work full-time.
Oh, that's so...
yeah. I mean, I was to the point I had to put a sign on the door, ask Dad, because the kids would come up, Mom, can I have this? And I'm like, your dad is literally right next to the room where the food is.
Yeah.
And school came naturally to him. I mean, I don't want to say he didn't work. He worked, but it came more naturally to him than I did. So
well, I'll just call it now. Like, this is not the average Mormon upbringing in a few ways.
Right.
Both of you had kind of non-shame-filled Mormon upbringings with relatively healthy parents and relatively healthy leaders. And you had, you worked, Jennifer, outside the home. You had career and educational ambitions. And then you both enjoyed the church, but it wasn't excessively focused on.
Right.
And you had flexible role, gender norm kind of roles.
exactly.
Yes.
I mean, my mom was going to school, so my dad did like him. He took over the parent, all the parenting duties while my mom was in school.
Yeah.
So in some ways, this is like a setup for like actually a really healthy Mormon experience. So really quickly, how many kids did you have, and how
3.
We
quickly?
have 3.
3?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
And did you say
2
one?
bio and 1 adopted.
Okay.
Yeah, 2 biological, 2 sons, and then a daughter.
Okay. Okay.
And we had the 2 older ones in Utah. Then we moved to Wisconsin, and we came up with this harebrained idea to adopt a little girl from China.
Yeah.
I don't feel like it was harebrained.
No, it was spur of the moment. But if you ask us, like, probably the 3 best decisions we ever made, that would probably be number 2.
Nice.
Yeah.
So unless there's other parts of your story that are really worth mentioning, I'm really curious to know when things start going off the rails.
When we moved to Wisconsin.
Okay, so around what year is that?
2000.
Okay, so you moved to Wisconsin in 2000. What could go wrong?
It was the way I describe it. And my mission president would always say, he would always joke around that God doesn't like the Midwest because of what they did to Joseph Smith. So the church is like way different. And I'd always joke about that because I told him we were moving. And he's like, oh, the Midwest. It was the Isle of Misfit Toys. It really was. It was really hard to be like we were, because I think we were good members. We were committed, but we weren't hardcore. But we started having some experiences with the church that I would say started weighing on my shelf a little bit. And just watching the leaders, some of the things they did, and it wasn't too bad in Wisconsin. It was more when we moved to Illinois, and then started positioning ourselves to go overseas. It wasn't anything. It wasn't anything bad. It was just I always kind of reflected on things the church did, and my mom would always say, "Well, it's the members, not the church," and be like, "Well, but the members are called by the church. They're inspired by whatever, and they speak for the church, and these high up leaders that are doing things that are just wrong to some of the members and to us and stuff like that."
So like just at high level, briefly, what types of things are you talking about? Just to give us a flavoring.
Well, I got called to be seminary teacher, and I had more of a rule where like it was early morning, they'd come down into my basement, and I didn't really care what the kids did. I had this girl that was a senior, her name was Susan, and she was a model. She was very attractive, very nice girl, but she would show up to seminary in her slippers and her robe. She'd roll out of bed, and then she'd go home and get dressed. And she'd come like lay on the couch and participate in seminary, and it was great. She was participative. All the kids were great.
And I'm thinking about your experience where you had long hair and you were basically kicked out of seminary.
Yeah,
exactly.
So sounds like you were trying to not be that teacher.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so the bishop came in, and he came in to my class, and he says, well, Susan's laying on the couch and Philip's, over there kind of half dozing. I'm like, they're here. Mm-hmm. That's 80% of it. And I can't,
Right.
I want him here. Mm-hmm. And I said, I don't really care what you think. But it was just,
and the leaders didn't like that.
He was okay with it. He was okay with it, but I think he didn't like the fact that, he couldn't control us to the point where she was young women's president. I don't remember what I was doing. And I think it just, not in any sense of a negative way at that point. It was just more, the church did things different, and some of the counsel that we got from the bishop was not good.
Yeah.
So you started to feel like the leaders were off a little bit.
I think so. And like I also think back before seminary teacher, he was the word mission leader. And we had this one couple, missionaries that, we always, every time we had missionaries, we invited them over, like, I think it was family home evening night, right? Mm-hmm. Monday night for dinner. And this one couplet, they basically used their P-Day service to help me. That's when I was deep into nursing school. He was working. They'd come and they'd do laundry at my house, but then they'd mow my lawn and things like that. And it ended up becoming a big thing. They were like, well, you shouldn't be there. She's there alone and stuff like that. And it was before they actually had the rule where you can't have the two young men with the woman. I wasn't alone. I had my kids in the house.
No, they had the rule.
Oh, did they have the rule?
They had the rule.
I didn't know.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
I didn't know about
the
the rule. But, I feel like just even starting to come over every week, they started frowning on that. Even with the ensuing missionaries, it became more like once a month.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But I would have been in trouble without them because he wasn't in a position to mow the lawn very well. And so it really was a dual service. And it's not like I hung out with them. I was studying. I'm like, okay, you go do. I'm going to be studying.
You weren't experiencing attraction to the missionaries?
Heck no. They were children.
They were really nice guys. They were really
nice guys.
Joking,
I know. But yeah, I know, right?
It's like sometimes things get
worry.
sexualized in the church.
Yeah.
No.
And nope, no attraction whatsoever. And my kids loved them.
And I was grateful for them coming over and helping because they were just great guys, and we stayed in touch with them for years.
And my kids had them on a pedestal. It was just the two boys at that point, but they thought that those two were the cat's meow, which I loved. I liked that my kids thought that a missionary was good and cool. And
then we had a gal that was in my seminary class that her parents were going through a pretty nasty divorce, and her dad came to me and said, I got to get her out of here, and can she come live with you guys for a little while? And I said, yeah, absolutely. She come live with us. She was 15, and our son was about 5 years younger, and she got along really well with the kids. We'd just gotten our daughter from China, so we needed help. And she came, and she was really struggling, and she would express some of the struggles she was having because of the divorce. And so we let her stay with us longer than we agreed to. And the bishop told us we shouldn't be doing that. And he went and told the dad she shouldn't be living with them. This is, and we basically just told him, go screw yourself. This isn't your business. Mm-hmm. And it was like
I immediately got released from the Young Women's Presidency when this was happening.
Oh. And then the stake president called me and said, you shouldn't have her there. And I'm like, why? I've got clean hands. I'm trying to help these people out. And he called the dad and said, you shouldn't allow, her name was Ashley, to live with them. And the stake president called me and said, you need to push her back. And I said, I'll push her back when they're ready. He's not ready yet. And he's like, well, I wouldn't want to have to, bring a church court against you. And I said, I don't care what you do. Bring a church court. I couldn't care less.
Okay.
And so she
Interesting.
moved back with her parents, and I'm still friends with her. You know, she moved on.
She's
and
married with a kid.
Yeah, and she actually ended up leaving the church later. But
Yeah.
it was just, we started this pattern where the church was telling us how to live our lives, and it just got worse. But that was kind of our first.
Okay.
And the way we avoided that is we didn't mean to do it, but we moved. We were in Wisconsin, we moved to Illinois.
That was for a job, though.
Yeah, for a job. And but Illinois became like Isle of Misfit Toys
Part 2.
exponential.
Okay.
It was worse. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So when did things go from just awkward, unreasonable leadership experiences to more problematic?
I'd skip to Josh
Well,
for that, right?
I'll skip. But in 2005, I worked for a company that was kind of the big thing in town. Everybody worked there. The bishop worked there
In Chicago.
in Illinois, in Peoria,
Oh, Peoria. Okay.
for Caterpillar. Yeah.
Okay. Oh,
And I was
Caterpillar.
pretty high up in finance, and I was making good money. And our bishop worked there too, and I didn't like the bishop, and we would later have worse experiences. But he sent out an email to everybody and said, "Oh, it's bonus time. Everybody's getting their big bonuses. So
When you
make sure
say
you pay
everybody in the company or in the church?
in the church that worked for the company.
In
which
Peoria,
was,
half the people worked for Caterpillar, the other half worked for the hospital. It felt like. I mean, obviously there's other jobs, but
Yeah,
those were the
okay.
two big entities there.
so he sent out an email saying, "Oh, make sure you pay your tithing," and I was already not big on paying tithing because of what the church did with it and all that. And so,
Wait, what were your concerns about what the church did with it?
Well, I didn't want my money going to BYU for one.
I just,
Spoken like a true Ute.
Exactly.
I just knew enough about what the church wasn't doing in terms of, whatever their wealth was at that time. They were giving a fraction of it to charitable contributions and all that. And so I didn't stop paying tithing. So what I did is I took that 10% and I put it in an account. I opened up a Fidelity Investments account and I put it in there and I said, okay, when I reconcile this, I'll pay it. And
That smells a lot like apostasy to me.
it was. Yeah.
That sounds like the beginning of the end.
It wasn't. It was just it was almost like I was giving in to this bishop and going to have to write him this big check because he sent me an email and forced it.
Yeah.
And I didn't want that. And I was
I'm feeling the strong arm theme.
Exactly. Exactly. Because tithing's supposed to be what you're choosing to do to live the gospel as you've been taught, not because your bishop says you need to do this.
Yeah, but I'll tell you later what I did with that account later. But I kept it. I kept doing 10%. And paid for all my kids' college with it, and that was, and I felt like I can stand before God and say, I helped my kids out because we struggled through college. We didn't have, our parents couldn't afford it. We had to go into debt, and so I wanted to do that for my kids. And if God wants to send me to hell for giving my kids an advantage, our kids are all great. They all in their careers, they're flourishing.
Yeah.
Versus giving it to a $200 billion corporation, then I'm okay with that.
Okay, and you would have known back then the church was worth $200 billion. That was too early.
I didn't. I went for several years, just putting the money in an account, thinking at some point I'm going to write them a big check, and I would, we weren't like real temple active, so we didn't really care about getting a recommend.
Okay, so really quickly, we've already established that your Mormon story was unique in a lot of ways, but so by the time you're in Peoria, you're thinking your leaders are annoying you. You're not paying a full tithe. You're telling the leaders no, or you're thinking that it's kind of off. Like those are all like not orthodox impulses.
Right.
No.
And so I'm wondering, in Peoria, were you conscious about the fact that like you weren't really totally on plan? You weren't totally.
He was, I wasn't.
I refused. I refused to have a calling.
So you're like, but are you thinking in your mind, I'm not really into this church much anymore? Or was it just, church is still totally true? Okay.
It'll pass.
What?
It'll pass. Yeah, it'll pass.
Okay, so
Yeah.
even though you're not totally Orthodox or Orthoprax, in your heart, you're still a full believer at this point.
Yeah, and contextually, we had moved to Peoria with the promise. They drew me to the company with the promise they'd move us overseas within a year. So we knew we were going to be in Peoria for a year.
Okay.
And so it was kind of just like, I don't want to call in. I'm not going to take this too serious. And we would go to church. We were still active.
Yeah. But not super Orthoprax, I'll say. Jennifer, anything you want to add to that? You said he was, but you weren't.
He was probably a little bit more off than I was. I can't remember. I think, did I have a calling in the primary then? I don't remember what I did, but I was a nurse, so I was working a lot, sometimes on Sundays anyways. And the pediatric cardiac surgeon that I worked with was in our ward. So that was kind of nice that I at least had that. But,
So when did the next big crack start to form?
After we got back from India.
No, it was in India.
In India?
So we moved to India. We moved to Bangalore, and we lived there. And it was good. Our kids were we had a teenager he was 14, and we went to church, and he was super active. He was in it to win it. Our second kid was like a little bit ambivalent, but would go to church, and then our daughter was too young to really worry about it.
For some reason, and I've been to Bangalore, for some reason it wouldn't have occurred to me that India would have wards.
We did
LDS
have a ward, and we met
did.
above a bakery.
In Bangalore.
In Bangalore.
It was technically a district.
Okay.
It was technically
that's right.
branch.
Yeah, you're
It
right.
was under a district, under the mission president.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I always loved it. I was the only woman there that was Sister Jennifer. Everybody else was like normally I would be Sister Kevin.
Yeah.
But they let me be Sister Jennifer. I don't know if it was because I had a dual role. I was in the primary and the young women's at the same time. I don't know.
But
it was pretty cool.
Something that I should know, but I don't. You hear about Mormon missionaries being called to Africa and Latin America and the Philippines like all day long. You never hear about Mormon missionaries being called to India or China.
We had them.
I think I understand why, but why isn't India full of a gazillion Mormon missionaries? Do you know?
They don't allow them. They only allow certain visas.
India doesn't allow Mormon missionaries.
And I'll get into a story that I ran into with the missionaries
go ahead.
a little later. I'll do it a little later because it will fall in the pattern.
Okay.
But the big event that happened with us when we were in India is our son would come to me and he'd say, I'm struggling a little bit with things I'm looking at on my phone. And I was like, all right,
so
whatever.
This is internet era?
Yeah.
What year about this?
This would be 2008.
2005. Oh, yeah.
No, it was about 2008.
Yeah,
Okay.
something like that.
So he had a whatever phone that he could access the internet.
Facebook was around by that point.
It just started.
Mormon Think would have been around by that point. Mormon stories.
He's telling you.
Yeah, and he'd be like, I'm struggling with some stuff I'm looking at the internet on the internet. I said, well, and full disclosure, I've never been the type of person that really got it with porn. I never really cared. But I didn't demonize it. I just said, well, do the best you can, and don't let it turn you into some weirdo. Just whatever, do the best you can. And he would come to me at night and he'd be like, I'm really struggling, Dad. Can you take my phone? And I just set it on my nightstand. The next day he'd get it, and we didn't really talk about it. But then he came to me and he said, can I talk to you about something? I said, yeah. And he said, I think I'm gay. And I said, okay. And all the kind of, all the emotions go through. It's like, okay, this is totally contrary to what the church teaches and all that. And I didn't think about it in terms of the church. I thought about it in terms of how is he going to have to navigate life with this? But he's only 14. And I said, you know what? I said, you're too old. You're too young right now to worry about that. You shouldn't be thinking about your sexuality. You should not be having sex with anybody. Please don't wait, and don't talk about it right now. I said, figure it out and give it some time. And he said, okay. And he said, that's fine. And I said, it's not that we're trying to hide it or anything. I said, it's just, you shouldn't be figuring it out that out right now. I said, it doesn't sound like you're sure. And he said, yeah, you're right. And he just said, well, what if I am? And I said, then you are. That's fine, whatever. And I said, if you're asking if me and Mom are going to marginalize you because of it, we never will. And so we didn't talk about it for a couple of years. It just went away, and we didn't talk about it.
Until he was 17.
Yeah.
Right.
So thinking about the timeline, I'm wondering if this is 2008, I'm wondering if you knew that back in California, your home state,
I did.
The church was declaring war on gay people through Proposition 8. You were aware?
Oh, I was aware.
Yeah, we weren't Californians, of course, up to
No,
that
but
point, but we knew about it. It was on the
It was
news.
news, yeah.
I mean, my point is that by that point, the church was declaring war on gay people.
Exactly.
And I hated it.
He
Yeah,
grew
and
up
that was
hearing Adam
something
and
that
Eve,
kind
not
of
Adam
brought-
and Steve.
That was something that came to my mind, was like, okay, they're declaring war on you. And so it wasn't that I didn't want him to, he wasn't sure, because he said, I think. And I said, well, you should not be having sex at 14. I don't care if it's
Straight or gay.
I don't care.
Yeah.
So just don't say anything, wait. So then we moved back, and he was super active, super great kid. We moved back to Illinois into the same ward that was just as bad.
Same bishop.
And he came to me, or came to both of us, and he said, I'm gay. I said, all right, fine. And it was interesting because he was dating girls and doing all this, and he had this girl that he was dating that we just absolutely loved. She was just such a sweet girl. And he said, I'm going to break up with her because there's just not that.
Yeah.
And he said, but I'm not going out and dating and having sex or anything. And I said, all right, that's fine. I said, but don't announce it. I said, be what you want to be. I said, but don't announce it.
Can I just note, Margie, I'm sure you're thinking this too, you must have had a great relationship with your kid, because most kids aren't like turning in their phone to their parents saying, I don't want to be looking at this stuff, or coming to their kid at 14 or parents at 14 or 16 and saying, hey, I think I might be gay. What do you guys think?
Well, I feel like that,
that's
and
rare.
I feel like that kid, he's also was always, I don't know how to say very choice, but he was always very mature for his age. And like when he was little, I'd be like, okay, that's going to be the next prophet. Because he just, he had charisma and faith and just all the things. And yeah, I mean, I feel like we're very lucky. I think we have great relationship with all three kids.
As a parent, you can ruin a relationship with great kids.
I mean, honestly, but like up until I got too tired working night shift, I was still tucking my kids in as teenagers till they got to the point they'd come and kiss me because I was asleep on the couch.
Yeah.
And we'd have a lot of great discussions.
Yeah.
It was when he was 17, I was doing one of my tuck-ins, and that's when he told me he was gay.
Yeah.
But
So we moved back to Peoria, and he doesn't follow my advice, which, okay, fine. And he tells the bishop, because he thinks, I'm a good kid. I'm not having sex. I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm going to tell the bishop. So he tells the bishop, and the bishop automatically calls me, and he says, well, Josh shared this with me, and he needs to get into counseling. And I've arranged a counselor for him. And at that point, I didn't know enough of what to do. And he said, it's a non-LDS counselor, and I want him to start seeing him. So I asked Josh about it, and Josh was like, yeah, whatever, I don't care. I'll go see this counselor.
Well, and Josh didn't want to be gay.
Right. He
So
didn't.
he was hoping this would help him.
Well, not at that point.
Well, no, a little bit.
So he went and started seeing this counselor. He saw him twice. And on the second time, I went to go pick him up. And the counselor came out, and he said, what am I trying to do here? What's the goal? He said, am I supposed to make your kid not gay? And I said, I don't know. And he said, well, here's the news.
Didn't the bishop tell him?
I know, right?
So he says, here's the news. You've got a really brilliant, smart, amazing, well-adjusted gay kid. And he said, I'm not going to counsel him anymore.
Yeah.
You don't need me.
Oh, how
I know,
Yeah.
right?
And this is the counselor the bishop recommended?
Yeah, but he was not.
He was not Mormon.
He was
Not
He was
Mormon.
Catholic.
Yeah.
I guess slim pickings in Peoria.
Right.
Well,
yeah.
so super nice guy too. I really appreciated him saying that. So I went back and told the bishop, and the bishop said, well, you need to go to an LDS counselor.
Yeah, let's find a new counselor.
That was not what.
He said the LDS counselor is in Chicago, so every week you're going to have to drive your son to Chicago, which is 160 miles each way. And I said, no, I'm not doing that.
It's just worst advice ever.
Well, it gets worse later.
Okay,
yeah,
thanks.
unfortunately. But I said, I'm not doing that. That's not going to happen. I said, I'm just going to let him be who he is. And so time went on, and Josh is getting ready to apply for school. And the bishop calls me in and he says, your son's not applying to BYU. And basically told me I was derelict as a parent.
He tells a youth. He tells a youth that.
Right.
I mean, even if he wasn't gay, that was not on the
That's
table.
enough to leave the
Well,
church right
he said,
there.
he goes, you should have him go to BYU. It will really help him. And I said, what will it help him with? I said, he's a biochemist that wants to go to med school. How is BYU going to help him? And the guy that was...
And his answer was electroshock therapy.
yes, exactly. So the guy that Jen referenced that was the...
dark, not
I know,
funny.
dark humor, sorry.
I thought it was funny.
But, true facts, yeah.
The guy that was the head of the pediatric cardiology at the hospital, he was a friend of ours, and he was on the U of I med school admissions board. And he told us, he said, don't send your son to BYU, don't send him. And he could have gotten into any school.
Yeah.
Stanford, Northwestern. He said, don't send him to those schools. Send him to somewhere where they do research their whole 4 years. And so he got in and got a scholarship to University of Nebraska at Lincoln and ended up going there. Mm-hmm. And so he left to go to school, and we left to go to Tokyo, to move to Tokyo. And so, we were in Tokyo. I was pretty much...
Man, your son dodged a bullet. I mean, just
wait.
Oh, because you didn't force him to go to BYU?
Yeah.
It wasn't. He didn't even apply. It wasn't even a conversation.
No, but I mean, that, again, not a traditional Mormon story.
Right. Because we did know people that would say, we'll only pay for school if you go to BYU.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
right.
So many parents
I knew
are like,
lots of people like that.
I won't pay for your school if you don't go to BYU. Yeah.
I ran into a couple of people like that in Tokyo.
Y'all are like, please don't go to BYU.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, we'll still love you, but it'll be hard.
And we'd kind of always been raised, or at least I think education is education. It's not, don't mix church with education. And so I couldn't have gotten into BYU, but I wouldn't win anyways. And we never encouraged our kids to go to BYU because we just wanted them to focus on their education. So everything went pretty normal in Tokyo. I was to the point where I was really starting seeing cracks in the church, and I wasn't real active. And we were in a ward that had general authority, the mission president, and the stake president. And so I got to know the general authorities there. Stevenson was our general authority, and I got to know him really well. I became friends with him.
Is that Gary Stevenson?
Gary Stevenson, who's now the apostle. And he was a good man. He treated us well. He was nice. But about a year into it, so we're 2012, Josh is home for Christmas, and he says, I'm thinking about going on a mission. And I said, okay.
What?
Is that the right decision? And he said, well, and I was enough 1 foot in the church and 1 foot out that I was kind of playing the good guy, bad guy. And he's like, well, maybe it'll help me put things in perspective with my sexuality and stuff. And I said, well, okay, if you want to do that, I'll support you. And he was going to University of Nebraska. He was on a scholarship there, biochemistry. He had gotten into the marching band, which I think that year they let 3 freshmen in. I mean, it was like...
Very competitive.
It was very competitive. Mm-hmm. And so he was flourishing there.
Was he going to church there?
He was.
So he was still attending during this time.
He was full on at that point in time. He was planning to probably be a celibate gay man in the church.
Wasn't dating anybody.
He was living all the tenets of the gospel as one should at that.
Yeah. So anyway, to make a long story short, he decided to go on a mission. He which I kind of didn't. I thought, okay, let's give it a chance and whatever. So he gets called to the Baltic region, Lithuania, that area, under the Russia area presidency. And, we came back to Salt Lake. We went through the temple, and it was the first time that she and I had been through the temple in years. And I kind of got a view of like, you go through the temple after you've kind of seen some of the way the sausage is made, and it was pretty negative for me, but I didn't say anything. We took Josh. He went through the temple. The next day, we dropped him off at the MTC, and he took off, and we went back to Tokyo. And over the next 6 months, my testimony was really dwindling, and I told the bishop about it. So I was the CFO of the company at that time. So I had a lot of. In Japan, you do dinners, you drink, you go do all this stuff as a leader. And I had a couple instances where I was caught drinking. A guy that worked for me, his wife was friends with the bishop's wife. And so the bishop called me in and he said, hey, I know that you've been, there was this picture that she showed my wife, which I don't know why she did that. And I said, yeah, once in a while I drink. And he's like, well, and I didn't have a call in. And he was pretty cool about it. He just said, well, you shouldn't do that. And I said, I'm the CFO of the company. I'm not going to sit there and not drink because it's not socially acceptable. Although I could have done it, I just didn't care. And I said, I'm not doing anything hardcore. And I didn't drive. I had a driver. I'd take the subway. And he just said, well, you shouldn't do that. I said, okay, duly noted. But he didn't say anything.
This keeps happening to you in the church.
Well, but then 3 weeks later, he calls me and he says, come in my office. And I thought, oh, here we go. And he says, I'd like to call you to be the gospel doctrine teacher. And I was like, what? And he's like, yeah, I think you'd be really good. You have a good testimony. You speak really, you're knowledgeable about the church. And I thought, okay, this is either going to be something that makes me or breaks me. And I accepted the calling. And we were teaching Doctrine and Covenants. And so I started teaching every Sunday. Our son, so I gave another piece of advice to, you always know you've raised independent kids when they don't listen to you.
Yeah.
And he told his mission president
That he was gay.
that he was struggling.
And he had told him not to.
I told him not to. I said, if you are or not, I don't care. Figure out on your own, but it's not going to help you.
He was worried how people would treat him.
Right.
So the mission president calls me and he goes, yeah, I talked to Josh and I want him to get into counseling. And we have this really good LDS counselor that's a missionary. I said, well, what are his credentials? And he was a family counselor and had no business counseling gay kids. Mm-hmm. And he said, I'm actually putting it as a stipulation that your son has to go to counseling with this person to stay on his mission. And so I called Josh and I said, what do you think? And he's like, no, I think it'll be fine. It'll be okay.
The letter that I received from Josh was, this is why I was sent to Lithuania, is because he's going to cure me of my gayness.
Oh, really? How did that make you feel?
I was a little heartbroken because by then I knew that you were born gay, because I knew he'd been struggling for so many years.
Yes.
He didn't want to be gay. And so I fully, I knew that gayness wasn't a choice. So I just thought, kid, you're setting yourself up for failure. That he was just so convinced that this was good. This was it. This is why I'm supposed to be here. I'm going to be cured of my gayness. Life is going to be good now.
So let me, if I could just jump in and ask, you're drinking by this point, like lightly,
yeah,
for business purposes.
Yeah, only for business.
And you're working, which is probably more of a sin in Mormonism than drinking.
I actually wasn't working in Japan, but I mean, talking about working, I had someone get mad at me for working on Sundays as state president.
What I'm trying to say is that you're both kind of not fully Orthodox Mormons.
Right.
And so your son comes to you and says, I'm going to go to mission, and he's gay. Was there any part of you that were like, don't go on a mission? Like this church isn't for you.
Yeah.
Don't go.
Or even around attending church.
Yeah.
That did you ever have this moment of like, we know the messaging, and if our child really thinks that means he's absorbing all this sort of self-hatred, did you ever have feelings like that you were wrestling?
He has this way of. He's got such a strong, amazing personality that I think people look past it. It was like, okay, whatever. And he wasn't like, I don't want to use the wrong word, but he wasn't real flamboyant, running around telling everybody he's gay. He kind of kept it to himself. And so it wasn't really a conversation. And in Nebraska, he didn't really, he wasn't dating anybody. He wasn't, and so it was more just like a sub-conversation. I think he kept it a little quieter with the church. He didn't announce it.
But in terms of when I asked if you had thought about telling him not to go on a mission.
Absolutely.
You thought about it, but did you actually tell him?
I told him I didn't think he should.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I said, but I'll support you if you want. I'm not going to tell you not to.
Did you say why?
Yeah. And again, like Jen said, he wasn't 100% committed that he was gay. I think he knew he was, but I don't think he was
No,
there was
he
still
knew
a
he
doubt.
was. I don't think he knew he was born gay
There was still a doubt.
or something.
So he had taken in enough of the church conditioning around it. That's what it sounds like to me.
That's exactly it. And
Yeah.
and that, I mean, and
Yeah.
he probably had a harder time leaving the church than he did for sure with
Yeah.
with
your
all that.
husband.
And
Yeah.
when we talk about what happens next, that was kind of the pinnacle.
Okay. So it sounds like maybe y'all were a little bit like me and Margie, even though there were points where we knew the church wasn't true. We wanted to let our kids have their own journey.
Right. And
their own-
honestly, it was more so him. I'm a full card carrying,
Member, yeah.
he's on his way to hell because he's drinking. What am I going to do with my little celestial family? I think there was once my daughter found out he was drinking and she cried.
But that was a little later.
Because she found, it was a little later.
That was when we moved back.
Okay.
So did
But,
so
yeah,
really quickly.
but I was in the Young Women's Presidency and then later the Primary Presidency.
So I'm
in
also
Tokyo.
hearing some differentiation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So was number one when you started drinking, Kevin, did that reflect that your beliefs were slipping, or even as you started drinking, you didn't that didn't reflect a change in your orthodox beliefs?
It did a little bit, but what I was believing was what I started thinking is the church is still true, but there's certain things that I'm not gonna hang my hat on, and I don't believe. Like I even said to the bishop, I said so I'm in the community. I was working with Caroline Kennedy, who was the ambassador to Japan, on certain things, initiatives to help people in the country. I was doing all these things. I'm good to my kids. Is God really going to send me to hell because I drink socially as part of my job? And so that was my mindset. The church was still true, but there were aspects of the church that they had gotten wrong, and so
Yeah.
I didn't really worry about
It
it.
reminds me very much of your parenting, that how you grew up, your mission president. It's like that became a template of like, hey, there are a few things that are
Right.
really important.
Right.
And then there are a lot of things that you can
Just noise. And when the bishop called me to be gospel doctrine teacher, 3 weeks later,
I felt validated.
I never told him I was not going to drink.
Yeah, yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And so for you, Jennifer, was that a source of conflict as you were noticing that he was practicing his Mormonism in a more laxed way? Was that a spoken source of contention between you two, or
Not
did y'all
enough
just
to
not
fight
talk
over.
about it?
I mean, he knew I didn't like it, but I wasn't going to let that hurt our relationship. It's like, all right, you know how I feel about it. Let's move on, type of a thing.
So family over church, even at that point.
Yeah, yeah.
It
Okay.
did get a little contentious with us a little later, but then we found a middle ground.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So your mission president is saying your gay son needs counseling.
Yep.
Okay. And then what happened?
So I called Josh and I said, what do you think? Do you want me to fight this? And he's like, no, I think it'll help me. And so, okay. So he starts going to counseling. And very quickly we realized he's almost a year into it. He left in the summer, and this is probably May. We realized
2012?
2012.
Okay.
2013. 2013. So he left in 12 and 2013.
Okay.
We realized that his demeanor was changing significantly.
Yeah.
He was depressed. He wasn't the same, and he never struggled with depression. He was always just such
He was the most
we'd
cheerful,
move into a new neighborhood.
wonderful person in the
Yeah.
world, and all of a sudden he's not. I mean, it wasn't my kid.
Yeah.
My kid was gone.
Yeah. And so I started, he luckily had found a member in the area that would let him use his cell phone so I could talk to him. And I said, what's going on? He said, going to this counselor is just making me crazy. It's just, I'm depressed and I feel bad about myself. And I was like,
The counselor
Okay,
told him it
this
was
is-
his fault. He wasn't
Yeah.
trying hard enough to not be gay.
yeah, you're not washing the gayness away. And so I said, all right, you know what? You're done counseling. And I said, I'm going to call the mission president. And I'm going to tell him. And I said, the ramifications might be that you get sent home. I said, this guy's not, I did not like this mission president. And it came out in a very bad way later. But I said, the ramifications might be that you get sent home. And he said, okay. I said, can you live with that? And he said, yeah. So I called the mission president. I said, he's not going to counseling anymore. And I said, you do what you want, but he's not going to counseling. I'm his father, and you're not letting him go to counseling. He's like, okay, that's fine, but you're making the wrong decision. I said, don't care. But the damage had been done, and he couldn't get himself. And I think that the mission president marginalized him because of it and maybe didn't treat him as good as he could. And I think the damage was done to where Josh, I was hoping like the first few months of Josh's mission, he was doing really well. He's baptizing people. He's really like had all these friends, these families that loved him. And that was all gone. And I thought that would come back, and it didn't. And so we moved into about June. And I remember I called him, and he was just not himself. And I said, okay, I got to get you home. And he said, okay. And so I called the mission president. And I said, he needs to come home. And he said, I'm not sending him home. And, you know, it's a shame for a mission president to have to send someone home. And I said, look, he's not productive. He's not happy. I said, just let him come home. I said, and the pressing thing is it's June now. And I knew he was going to come home. And I wanted to get him home so I could put him back in school. And I called Nebraska and I said, hey, I had to go through a committee to get them to, I called him. I said, you know, he's doing something that he's going to go on a mission for 2 years. He needs a leave of absence. And oh, by the way, can you hold his scholarship? And they did. And so I called them back and I said, he may come home after a year. And they're like, well, we can let him back in the school, but we don't know if we'll reinstate his scholarship and he's going to have to try out for the band. And I said, I don't care. And they called me back and they're like, you know what, we talked about it. He can come back and we'll reinstate his scholarship.
Wow.
Okay.
And what I didn't want to happen, what was worrying me is that he would come back, it would drag out enough and he would miss the enrollment and he'd sit in Tokyo for 3 months lamenting about his life. And I didn't want that. So I called the mission president again and I said, he needs to come home. What do I need to do? And he's like, I'm his mission president. I've been called of God to lead this and he's not coming home.
Wow.
And so I said, I called Josh and I said, I'm just going to send you a ticket and just go to the airport and fly home. And he said, Dad, I don't have my passport. The mission president took it. So I called the mission president again, and I said, look, I'm not messing around. You need to send him home. And he's like, don't call me again. There's nothing you can do.
How are you guys feeling right
Pissed.
now? At this point, both of you?
My mantra was the church is true, the people are not. The church is true, the people are not. The church is true. It was really hard right then, especially because, like I said, this is the most joyful kid I have, and I'm just seeing him being tortured.
Yeah.
Yes, disappearing.
And like, okay, we're supposed to be talking about free agency. There's no free agency, or, you know, he wants to come home. Everyone wants him home. Who are you to say we can't bring him home?
Right.
And to take his passport.
Right.
His passport.
Yeah.
Which is standard.
Yeah, but they're not allowed to. They're not supposed to.
Yeah.
I mean, the first thing it says on the page of your passport is do not let this out of your possession and overseas. So I couldn't get any traction. And about a year before, I had gotten a call from the church security. And they said, we need your help. The mission president gave us your number, and there's 2 missionaries that have been arrested in Bangalore. And they're being held in an Indian prison, and they could be there for 6 months. And I remembered a guy that was our government liaison, who was a friend of mine that we did a lot of work with on logistics and stuff like that with the government. And the government in India is just fully bureaucratic. And I called this guy, I said, is there anything you can do to help? And he made some calls, and I'm not exactly sure what he did, but I'm pretty sure he had a friend that went down and paid a bribe and got these missionaries out. And the missionaries decided to stay. The government of India restricts their how many visas they'll give. So there's only like 40 missionaries allowed in the whole country. And they're not allowed to proselyte. And what they were charged with was proselyting, even though they said, absolutely, we didn't do it. So, you know, that was fine. But this is a year later. I remember those guys, and I had their business cards. And they had come about 6 months after the fact, and I went to lunch with them when they were in Bangalore. And they thanked me, and I said, you know, I don't know if I really did anything, but I'm glad that they got out and they were safe. And they were both ex-bureau, you know, FBI, all that. And so I called this guy, and I said, hey, do you remember me? He's like, yeah, I remember you. And I'm like, well, I'm in Tokyo now, and here's what I'm going through. And he's like, well, technically, they're not supposed to take their passport, and they can get in trouble for doing that. I said, especially in a place like the Baltic area. And he's like, Russia hates the church, and they will look for an opening to do anything against the church they can. And he's like, so you should call the mission department and make a complaint and all that. And he's like, but if you have anybody that you know in the consulate in Moscow, He's like, you could probably call the consulate, but I don't know if it'll help. And I said, okay. So I hung up, and I was stressed about it. And as this was happening, my testimony was going. It was going, just pivoting.
Yeah, because you're worried about your son's life.
Yeah.
And you want to send him a plane ticket so he can come home.
Right.
And your son's mission president is holding your son hostage by keeping his passport.
Yeah.
So your son can't come home and save his life effectively.
Right.
Well, and also I think
I felt like he was getting depressed enough to commit suicide, frankly.
And I think the CES letter and Mormon thing, I was starting to look at those.
Okay.
And
because of these experiences?
No, just I think they kind of
Slipped
it might
into
have accelerated it, but it was both. And so I remembered back to my MBA, and I did my MBA with a guy that I was in his study group, and we became friends. And afterwards, he went to work for the CIA. And I was so desperate, I called him. I emailed him. I had his email, and I said, "Can I talk to you?" And he's a member. And I don't know if he's still a member. I'm sure he was. But I called him, and I told him what was going on. And I said, I just need to get my kid home. And he's like, they are not supposed to take their passports. They can get in a lot of trouble. And he's like, here's what would have to happen. He's like, I can't call the consulate. People in assets in that area that we have can't call the consulate, but they can go in and file a State Department complaint from the U.S. to the consulate that their passport has been taken. He's like, but they'll open up an investigation, and it'll be a big investigation. It won't just be driving by the mission home and taking his passport. And he said it could get the mission shut down. He's like, it could have serious ramifications.
Yeah.
I said, okay. And he said, here's what I would do. He's like, I would call the mission president and let him know that you have some connections that can make his life really difficult. And he said, and if I have to call him, I'll call him for you. He says, because that's not right. If your son needs to come home, they should let him come home. Mm-hmm. And he said, but just make sure you do the right thing and don't, do the right thing. And I hung up, and I was like, I'm going to burn the mother to the ground. I'm done. He messed with the wrong guy. And before I called the mission president, I called my dad. And my dad was he was the one that could always talk me down off the ledge. And he said, what are you trying to accomplish here? He said, you're trying to get your son home. And he said, you could affect a lot of missionaries there and could make the church look really bad. And I said, I don't care. And he said, no, your goal needs to be to get your son home. He said, if you have to go beyond that, then do that. And I said, okay. And that was good advice. So I called the mission president, and I said, look, you're not supposed to have his passport. And I have some friends in very high up places that will call the State Department and file a complaint and report you to the consulate in Moscow, and they'll open an investigation. And he paused, and I knew at that point I had him. And he said, that would be very bad for the church. And that's, started talking about the Savior and all that. And I said, and this was when I knew I was out of the church, and I hope I can say this. I said,
Don't say bad words.
I said, don't F with me.
Yeah.
I said, because I will do whatever it takes to get him home.
Yes, that's right.
And so he says, okay. He says, well, I need to talk to Salt Lake, and I need to pray about it. And I said, as long as your prayer puts him on a plane in the next couple of days. And I made it clear that he was coming home not dishonorably. He was just coming home on a medical release or whatever. So I hung up the phone, and 4 hours later he called me, and he's like, yeah, we're going to send him home. And I said, okay.
The miracle of revelation.
That's
Revelation,
right.
that's
Prayer
right.
works.
So 2 days later, I went and I picked him up at the airport in Tokyo. And as we were driving home, he was upbeat, but he seemed a little defeated.
Because that's not the way to end your mission.
No, he'd had
Not at
such
all.
high hopes for it.
And so we were just talking about normal stuff, nothing, family, the kids, whatever. And he said, now what do I do? And I said, you go home, you call Nebraska, you register, and next week I'm flying you back there. And I said, never, ever try to make the church work for you. Mm-hmm. I said, because it won't. I said, you will, sorry. I said, you'll just frustrate yourself forever if you try to make it work. I said, it's not going to work for you. You're gay. That's fine, but don't try to make the church work for you. And he said, okay. And I had talked to our stake president, and our stake president was a good man. He really was. And he couldn't do anything, but I called him and I said, okay, Josh is coming home. And he said, okay, I want him to give his homecoming talk on Sunday. I was like, all right, I think that will be good. So when we were driving home, I said, this is what he wants to do. I said, I think it would be good for you. I said, he'll give you closure. I said, even though the ward doesn't really know you here, I said, you didn't come home dishonorably. You didn't do anything wrong. I said, and so mark this as an experience. And so he did. It wasn't a formal homecoming, but he spoke in church and spoke about his mission, bore his testimony in Lithuanian, walked off the stand, walked out of the church, and never went back to church again to this day.
Yes. Can I ask you, Jennifer, what you were feeling, and if you were in sync at this point with the direction of like never go back, don't try to make it work? For sure on that,
because I knew that there, like he said, there's just no place for a gay person to have a full life. Because, I wanted him to be able to have a partner in life, not be stuck to a life of celibacy. And after how he was treated on his mission, too many people feel that gayness is a choice, not that you're born that way. Because if anybody proved that to me, it was him with how hard he fought being gay. So for his own sanity, I agreed. He needed to just be out.
How did it feel, and this can be for both of you, the minute you saw him when you got him off his mission and you were able to have him in front of you?
So relieved. And he bounced back to the kid that I knew pretty fast.
Very fast.
Full of joy and of life and...
Wow.
Yeah.
It's like a life-saving.
Oh,
it really was.
Yeah, it was. Because it was about a week, and it was the week I took him to Tokyo, then I came back, or took him to Nebraska, I came back to Tokyo, and that's when it all erupted for me, and I did my mic drop moment. But when I took him to Nebraska, he tried out for the band, he got back in the band, he got in his classes, he got in the housing he wanted, everything fell into place. And so when I left to go back to Tokyo, I left him in a really good place. It wasn't, he had bounced back, and I knew he was going to be okay.
Yeah.
And so it was, I don't think until 2015, when we had a story that I'll tell you about, we hadn't really talked about the church at all. It wasn't.
You and him.
Yeah, no. I talked to him a couple months later and told him about my exit and what had happened, and that Mom was going to church and I wasn't. And he's just like, oh, okay, whatever. And when he would come out to Tokyo or out to California, nobody went to church. It wasn't even a conversation.
Got it. I have a question. How old were your other children when this was happening to Josh on his mission? And were they, I would imagine they were aware, but their ages?
15 and 9.
Okay, 15 and 9.
I think our middle kid knew, because they're best friends.
Yeah. Oh yeah, he knew.
They've been best friends their whole life. My daughter, I think, was a little young and didn't really know.
Okay.
She just knew he came home.
Okay.
I think we did tell her why. I can't remember.
Okay.
Did the mission president do anything mean or spiteful after he caved?
Nope.
Okay.
Nothing. I never heard from him again.
Okay.
I never talked to him again. And I didn't do anything. I emailed my friend back and I said, amazing advice. I need to buy you dinner. And he came home.
And then normally testimonies just don't evaporate, especially if you're gay sometimes. So just because he went back to Nebraska and you told him he didn't have to make the church work anymore, was it still a struggle for him to kind of
I think a little bit.
deconstruct his program?
Yes, for him. He told me like he was still feeling like the church was true and stuff even after he left. So, and
for a little bit.
So
Okay.
he didn't let it affect his life so much. I think he compartmentalized it.
Okay.
But he eventually transitioned into non-LDS life.
By the experiences we had in 2015 that we'll talk about in a minute.
Okay.
He was out by then. He was done.
Okay.
All right.
Should we go to what's next?
Let's go to, I'll talk about what happened with me a little bit.
Okay, yeah.
Because the week after, there were two experiences. The week after I got back, Dallin H. Oaks came to our ward. And I remember just sitting in the audience wanting to punch him in the face because of all the rhetoric, that he spewed. And I knew at that point I was out. I did not see him as anybody more than just an evil man.
For those who don't know, Donald H. Oakes was an attorney and then a judge. And then in the early 80s, I'll say, the church made him an apostle.
President of BYU first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. He oversaw the electroshock therapy of gay BYU students in the 70s, approved it. But then in the 80s, when he was made an apostle, if I've got my dates right, he architected the church's strategy for fighting same-sex marriage, for fighting the gay agenda in state legislatures and federally. Yep. And he became the poster child for anti-LGBT rhetoric for a good 20 or 30 years. And now he's the number 2 guy in the church. And as soon as the current 100-year-old prophet, Russell M. Nelson, dies, Dallin H. Oakes will take over as prophet. But he literally he's probably got like a over 500 batting average of saying something homophobic in his general conference talks. Yep. And certainly in 2008 to 2015 timeframe, he really couldn't give a general conference talk, as far as I remember, without saying something homophobic.
No.
So I just wanted to give that context. So now you've rescued your son from his mission, who's gay, and now Oakes comes to your board?
This was September of 2013.
Okay.
And I saw him as something very different than, the last time I'd seen an apostle was a few years before, and I still revered them as, but I saw him and I was just angry. I was just like, I wouldn't shake his hand. I don't want anything to do with him. But the next week I was in gospel doctrine and I was teaching, I think it was section 132. And I had a good understanding of what was going on with the church at that time. I struggled with the first vision, Book of Abraham, the Book of Mormon, and the priesthood, all that stuff, polygamy. And I was sitting in the class and I was teaching. I don't remember exactly what I was teaching, but there was a mission president was there, a counselor and the stake president was there, and the general authority was there. And towards the end of the class, there was about 10 minutes left. This guy that was, always really active in the class and asked questions, he raised his hand and I said, yeah, what's your question? He said, how do you reconcile the fact that Joseph Smith had 14-year-old brides, married other men's wives, and did all this before he received the revelation on polygamy? And I paused. I was a little surprised he asked that.
Somebody asks you this.
Yes, in gospel doctrine.
Definitely off script.
Yes. And so I sat there and I thought, okay, I'm waiting for a rescue. And I look over in the corner of my eye and the general authority, the mission president, and the counselor and the bishop were sitting there like this in their scriptures. They didn't say a word. And I waited for a sec and I just said, you know what, I can't reconcile it. I can't. I think it's one of those things hopefully the Lord will explain it to us and why that was okay, but I can't. Can we just move on? And there was just silence. And I just remember, Brother Bob, can you give a closing prayer? So I went and met the 2 kids and Jen. They started going out to the car and I walked into the bishop's office and I said, I'm not going to come back to church for a while. I need to be released. And he said, no, I'm not releasing you. You're doing a great job. And I said, I can't.
Like, seriously?
No, I said very calmly.
Let us go.
I said, I can't control what you do, but next week I won't be here, and you need to make sure that there's a gospel doctrine teacher here because I won't be, and I don't know when I'll be back.
Yeah.
And he just kind of looked at me, and I turned and walked out, and that was the last time I ever talked to him.
And that is what a boundary looks like.
Yes. Yeah. And so I did not go back to church again after that. That was my last time that I ever went back to church.
Till now, basically?
Ever.
Oh, yeah.
Never.
Yeah.
Just for fun, since we're talking about the church not respecting boundaries, one of our funniest stories, most disturbing stories, was when we were living in a different city and we had some friends whose son was in the MTC and they discovered that the church wasn't true and they wanted to just tell their son before he went overseas, because they would feel bad if he served 2 years of his mission, knowing that they decided the church wasn't true, but that they didn't tell him. So they actually drove to the MTC and said, "We want to talk." All they said is, "We want to talk to our son."
Right.
And you know what the MTC people said?
No.
They said, "You're not allowed to do that."
No.
Oh my gosh.
No.
And they're like, "Oh, sorry, no, we're his parents, and we
Right,
want to
right.
talk to our
Then
son."
they were like, we're actually not really sure where he is.
Yeah. They're like, we
And
don't
they were like-
know. Like, he could be anywhere. Yeah.
Wow.
But anyway, they did something very similar to you. They
Yeah.
said, "We're actually just going to sit here on this couch, and we're not leaving until you let us talk to our son."
Thank goodness.
So then finally, miraculously, they find
shows
him.
up,
They
of
find
course.
him. And so he comes, and they're like, "Well, can we have a room to go in?" And they're like, "Sure." And then as they're going into the room to talk to their son, the person wants to come with them.
Yes,
Oh,
they
geez.
try to go in with them.
And they're like, no, we're sorry. We want to talk to our son
got
alone.
this.
And you know what they said?
No.
"You're not allowed to do that."
Oh my gosh.
So they said, "We're talking to our son alone." So anyway, long story short, they left with their son and
Wow.
took him home. But isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
And the
nuts.
interesting thing in that story was when they told their son, what I remember is the son was like,
They told him
"I'm
that they
so
didn't.
glad you told me because I was going for you."
I was
Wow.
going on a mission for you. I didn't believe
And I
it
think
either.
there's so many kids that
walked
do
out.
that.
So they walked out.
I love it.
And then
I love it.
And then they had a call from their stake president on their answering machine before they made it home.
No
Oh,
way.
I believe it. Oh, no question. Oh, yeah. No question.
Wow.
That's funny, though.
Celebrating the boundary set for sure.
Wow.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, I don't mean to take away from your
No,
story.
that's,
but-
that's
that is
funny
hilarious. That's
Because I think
you're right. Boundaries that they just they control all.
Right.
I think looking back at some of those experiences, had we not been able, or at least I kind of blame myself, but standing up and saying, "No, this isn't right." He's not going to counseling. He's not going to an LDS counselor 150 miles away. He's not staying on his mission. He's not going to stay in the church. It could have turned out very bad for him
Yeah.
because
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
No, we've interviewed several ex-Mormon missionaries who were gay on their mission, and they wanted to die.
Yeah.
They would walk over a bridge and want to jump off. They would just, wish they
horrible.
wouldn't come home. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
it's very common. It's
Yeah.
disturbingly common.
it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
It is.
it's very sad and scary. And
Yeah.
And to think if they didn't have that, well, our son told us later. This is hard to say. He told us later that if we would have turned on him, he would have just killed himself. Mm-hmm. He wouldn't have navigated everything that he had to navigate, which was, I can't think about how difficult it was for him, but not to have your parents back. Because I made it clear to him. I said, "You're going to come home and I'm going to get really ugly here." And I didn't tell him what I did until recently.
Yeah.
I didn't tell him what I was doing. I just
Yeah.
said, "You're going to come home. Don't talk to the mission president. Don't call him. This is mine. I'll deal with it. And you're going to come home. So just know that." And he's like, "Okay."
Yeah. I love that you set out specifics like that at that point.
It was clear that it wasn't gonna fix itself.
Yeah.
And I had gone from being ambivalent to over the experience to being he cannot be on his mission.
That's right. Yeah.
And-
And I think there's considerable research about, right, the idea of parental love support, particularly within the LGBTQ, experience, how pivotal
Yeah.
it is
Oh,
in some of the
absolutely.
ramifications when
Yeah.
they
Oh, yeah.
don't have
Yeah.
that.
Something like kids are 8 times less likely to die by suicide or attempt suicide if they feel fully supported by their parents.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's. I won't get into a narrative of the church, but I once asked this general authority. I said, why are they so polarizing? Why does Dallin Oaks have to get up there? And you don't have to change the church. You don't have to change your policy. You don't have to do anything. But instead of having him get up there and talk about how bad gays are and how they're going to hell and the parents are bad, which gives the parents lose hope. It's like, okay, my gay kid is not going to be in the celestial kingdom with me. So why don't you just get up and say, maybe it's your challenge as a faithful member to have a gay kid, and if you kick him out and marginalize him, then you can't have a temple recommend. And I said that to him, and I said, it would not hurt the church at all. It wouldn't hurt the church. It wouldn't be giving them any type of allowance, but they don't do that. They won't, they just want it to be toxic. And I think they think by making it more toxic that people are going to not be gay because of it. And the ramifications are the opposite. Mm. Yeah. And so if I could say one thing, to Elder Oaks, it's like, just stop the vitriol. You don't have to change your policy. You don't have to change the doctrine. You don't have to like anything about it, but you're not helping the situation by the things that you say.
Yeah. So because of that, and do you want to talk about what you read in the CES letter, or what you listened to or read in Mormon Think, or listened to Mormon Stories that contributed to your...
It was just the standard four things. I always struggled with polygamy. When I read about the first vision and the different versions of the first vision, that became very clear because I always wondered why he didn't... Here's where I struggled with the Joseph Smith talking about, and the church talking about how the first vision was the most transcendent event in human history. Joseph was told not to join any church. He was told all this stuff. But 10 years later, when he formed the church, he bore his testimony and said nothing about the first vision. He didn't even mention it. And then 2 years later, he comes out with this first vision that doesn't even talk about God. And so when I read the different versions, and I read more than the four, I was like, this is clear he made this up. There's no question he made this up. And then the book of Abraham, that was easy. And then I had studied the Book of Mormon and kind of tried to tie that back to history and the anachronisms and everything. And for me, it wasn't one thing like it was for her. It was more the sum total of everything. Kind of, it's like the sum total of these experiences make you who you are. And it's like, okay, in isolation, people say, well, you don't understand about polygamy. Yeah, you're right. Maybe I don't. But then I don't understand about all these other things too. And when you look at it in the sum total, I just drew the conclusion that there's no way I'm not going to waste another minute of my life with this church. I've been deceived for 43 years or whatever it was. I'm not going to spend another minute. Mm-hmm. And so I told her, she didn't really want to hear anything about it.
I was totally la, 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 la.
Yeah.
Was this before or after you went to the bishop's office and you were
after.
So it was after that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, it was when he told me that he was never going back, that he started trying to tell me why. And I'm like, you know what? You do you, but la, 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 because the church has always taught us don't listen to anything against the church. Don't read any lyric. He's like, I'd like you to read this.
Spouse.
Yeah. Right. He's like, you know what? No, that's anti-Mormon. Keep that away from me. So
did you have a time that you were in kind of a mixed faith marriage then?
For over a year.
Yeah.
Over a year.
Yeah, I was convinced he was going to hell and my celestial family was gone, but I still loved him. I wasn't going to give him up. Okay. So we just agreed to disagree.
Yeah, we got to the point where we just didn't talk about it. And she'd get up and go. So the only fallout that happened immediately is our second kid was going to seminary and hated it. Mm-hmm. And I said, I don't care. I'm pulling rank. You don't have to go to seminary. Mm-hmm. But they still went, the two younger kids still went to church. And then we moved from Tokyo back to the U.S., and so we moved into, she moved back before I did and went to Utah and was going to church and stuff like that. And then I moved back and then we moved to California. Okay. And so I think our second kid had stopped going to church when they moved to Utah, and they were only here for 6 months. And then we moved to California. And then she started going to church in California a little bit with our daughter, but then our daughter was like, I'm not doing this anymore. And I told her, I said, she's 12. I'm not going to force a 12-year-old to go to church if she doesn't want to. And our younger kid, he had gone to Nebraska as well. He wanted to do software engineering with a minor in robotics, and they had that program. He wasn't as academically to the level that our older son was, but he still got a scholarship. And so he was there and our older son was there. And so
You're a Cornhusker. You go out for Utes to Cornhuskers.
I know, right?
to go blue, Michigan.
Yeah.
Now
Daughters
we're
in
Wolverines.
Michigan. So we kind of, but
So how are you feeling, Jen, during this time, especially? It sounds like you might have had some grief and loss. About your
because my whole family,
celestial.
my whole family was gone. They were out of it. I still had a lot of hard feelings about what Josh went through, though. So I was still in that. Okay, the church is true. The people are not. The church is true. And even as a card-carrying member of the church, I always had a hard time that I was never enough. I don't do enough visiting, teaching. I don't do this. And so there's all that guilt that you get when you're not living up to what you think is the standard.
Which you're always not, to be clear.
You can't.
No one can.
No, you can't. But, I was like, okay, I'm not enough. My family's left. So that was hard. And then for me, the final nail in the coffin was my little brother called. And he had seen something on Reddit that sounded a lot like Kevin. So he's like, has Kevin left the church? And I'm like, yeah, he has. And so then he convinced me to read the same CES letter that Kevin had been trying to get me to read. And so, here's another person that I value. Of course, I value Kevin above all, but then the only other than my kids that matter are my dad and my father-in-law and my brother, that's the crux, is my family. And so my little brother, who I've always had on a pedestal anyway, because he's probably definitely a more amazing person than I am in life. When he said, you should read this, because I've been having struggles too, and you should read this. Okay, well, both my little brother and my husband are saying I should read this. I'll read it. And when I read it, and it basically takes Joseph Smith out of the picture, and once you can't believe in Joseph Smith, the church crumbles.
Right.
So, and so that was hard, because I still, firmly believe in God, but it's like I need some religion, but if you've been a Mormon, it's so hard to pick up another religion because they don't seem right.
Right.
So I was having my own crisis of faith after that. But
and where was that?
This was in California.
So this was happening for you.
Yeah, this was in California as well.
Okay.
Yeah, and then the
you had stopped going to church.
I stopped going
about
to
6
church.
months before, because she was going alone.
Okay.
And I was working on a lot of Sundays anyway as a nurse.
I see.
But I had a funny experience when I went to Utah. When I was there for just a short time. But I thought, you know what? I'm a glutton for punishment. I'm going to go and try this. And so we went to the ward. And the bishop there was really nice, but I hadn't really interacted with him. And it was the one Sunday I just thought, I'm going to go to church. I sat in sacrament meeting, and then I went to the high priest group. And I'm sitting in a high priest, and they're arguing about something. And this guy stands up and he goes, you guys stop talking about it. You're too worried about the blacks. The blacks were less valiant in the pre-existence, and that's why they're black. Oh. And I remember hearing that, like, are they really saying this? It's 2014. And I got up and left. I walked out, and Jen was in the hall, and I remember it distinctly. I was going out one door, and she was down the hall, and I said, go in the parking lot. And she walked in the parking lot. I said, I'm never coming back to this church as long as I live, ever. I'm done. Yeah. I was started. Those were seeds of resignation for me.
Yeah.
It took a little while longer, and a couple events we could talk about, but I swore I'd never go back after that. Okay. I was like, okay, this just reaffirmed everything I'd known. And it had been almost a year since I'd been to church.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm, the theme that I think we started with was the idea of family over church, and maybe a different way to describe that is sort of like feeling like the Mormon church is threatening the safety or health of your family, having to choose between church or family. Did you feel like that sort of choice was being presented to you?
When I was still active, I definitely was feeling that way, because, again, I'm supposed to be striving to go to the celestial kingdom, and what good is that going to be if my family's not there with me?
Right.
And the church itself had done so much of that damage. So that was really hard, because it was getting harder and harder to say the church is true, the people are not. The church is true, the people are not. Just hold on, it's the people that are a problem. The church itself is perfect. And like I said, until I read that CES letter, and it all crumbled after. It was almost a relief for
At
me
that point.
when I finally was like, I can't believe in Joseph Smith. I'm like, okay, the pressure's off. I doesn't matter that I'm not good enough. It doesn't matter that my family has left. It's going to be okay.
Well, and I just have to ask this: what's it like during that time? You feel like your husband's lost and fallen. Like, well, I'm still on the straight and narrow.
Yeah.
But my husband's fallen, and now my kid's out.
Yeah.
And so, like, my family's going to the dark side, but I'm still faithful. What does that do to a family dynamic?
And a mom, like the role and the responsibility, particularly given a mother
and a wife.
Right. Yeah, it's everything. I mean, again, like I've always said, family's first. So I wasn't going to let it affect my family, you know, because at that point I'd been with this man over 20 years. And, you know, we've raised these kids and they're all good kids.
Yes.
Church or not, they were all incredible kids. They've never had, you know, drug issues or anything. They were all just good kids.
They're easy to raise.
Yeah, they treated people well, you know, and I don't want to say they're perfect. Obviously, no one's perfect. But overall, when I could compare our experiences with these kids to other people's experiences, I'm like, man, I have got just the most amazing kids, whether or not they're in the church. And same with him. I mean, he may not be going to church, but he was volunteering to do search and rescue. He was volunteering to help prisoners, you know, so he's giving back in better ways than I ever did. So I'm like...
But that's kind of the mind twist is that, okay, my husband and kids are great, but they're all fallen.
Right.
And that was hard. You know, I was like, okay.
Dissonance, right? Is that what you're saying,
there was
John?
that dissonance.
Or even like this weird position of like disappointment. What's it like to live feeling like your spouse and your children are disappointments?
Well, I don't want to say I was ever disappointed in them. I probably took a lot of it onto myself. Like I hadn't been good enough to try to overcome that. I hadn't been good enough of a wife to maybe support him the way I needed to help him not fall.
Exactly.
And like the kid that quit seminary, I had always told, well, she's a she now, so. But she's a transgender woman, so I had always told her. I need two things from you as a high school student. I need you to graduate high school. I need you to graduate seminary. And so even though he let her off the hook, she still came to me. She's like, Dad said I don't need to go to seminary. I really don't want to go. I hate seminary. And I'm like, you know what? After everything that's gone on with Josh, there's more important fish to fry, you know? And she still came to church with me. She still did, even when he would stay home. She still did all the things until when we were in Utah and Kevin finally said, we don't have to do this anymore. But you know, I still felt like a failure because...
Which that makes sense to me. It feels like you took all of that judgment that you might have had, like you were boundaried enough, to me, this is what I'm hearing, that you were able to still see them in more of an objective, larger frame of reference.
Right.
But you turned it all on you.
Yeah.
So it was internal, which I think... That really makes sense to me. Yes, for what we're kind of given as for the responsibility for our children in particular, and inferred is everyone else.
Exactly, because I mean, I even look at the way the church views it, like especially going back to the LGBTQ thing. You know, you parents have raised these gay kids. You should not let this happen, and you know, there's all that, and you know. There's conference talks if your kids leave the church, it's your fault because you didn't raise them right. You know, and I always felt a little bit of guilt because our parents, as supportive as they've always been, I always felt bad that I think that they would internalize some of that, you know, because none of their kids, you know, both sets of parents, none of their kids are members of the church or, you know, active at least. And so I'm sure that they all felt like failures. I mean, I know his mom probably still puts our names in the temple. I'm sure she does. Hoping against hope, and she loves us anyway. You know, none of them have ever judged us. They all still go to church. They all still support us. You know, they accept our kids for who they are and love them, which I feel like is amazing with all the rhetoric that you get with the church, especially on that older generation. Because I think that senior generation has a harder time accepting the LGBT community than most people.
But we had to actively work that to. So we moved to California in 2014. She really didn't go to church in the summer, May of 2014. She didn't really go to church much.
I don't want to go alone.
And so there was almost a year that we didn't ever talk about the church at
Okay.
all. We just didn't mention it. I didn't care if she went to church. We were at a point where we just didn't talk about it. If she wanted to go to church, wanted to be active, fine, she could be active. She didn't bother me about going to church. She never asked me to go to church, anything. But then when she read what she read, I remember I was sitting on the couch doing work on my computer, and she walks up and she's like, I'm out of church. She's like, I'm not doing this anymore either. And it was because of the first vision. I was like, holy crap, welcome to the dark side. And so we didn't say a lot, but then we went into this in the 2014, in the fall of 2014 was when our daughter turned 12. And, I told you guys, she was getting love bombed by the church, and they were sending her all these things. But then at school, the girls would totally ignore her.
The Mormon girls.
Mormon girls would totally ignore her. And she didn't care about that. She just thought it was odd. She'd be like, these guys come by the house and want me to come to seminary. They want me to go to church. But then they walk by me in the hall and stick their noses up. And she had a different group of friends, so it wasn't a big deal to her. She didn't really care. But so we went quite a while until 2015. But in that time, our parents were calling saying, well, Sydney going to church? Why is she not going to Young Women's? You're denying her that opportunity, blah, 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 blah.
Oh, wow. So they were on you a little bit.
Oh, yeah. No, they were on us, and they didn't know. And so I decided the best way to do it, because we wanted to be really respectful to them. We didn't want to, we knew this was going to rock their world. And, my in-laws have always treated me good. I think my mom and dad loved her more than they loved me.
I'm the favorite child in
and
their
so
family.
we wanted to walk that line very carefully. So I wrote an email to the family, and I just said, look, I don't want to go into the reasons, but we've left the church and we don't really want to have a dialogue. And I put at the end, I said, there's historical things, there's things that we've been through with Josh, there's just the sum total of all these things. And my dad called me, and he said, I want to know what you've read. And my dad was always the type of person that I knew he would give me an objective view. And I said, Dad, I don't really want to do. He's like, no, I want to know. He's like, you said there was a lot of doctrine. I said, all right. So I think I sent him the link to Mormon Think and the CES letter. And he called me back a couple days later, and in his wisdom that he is as a father, he said to me, he said, I read what you gave me. And he said, I understand how you've drawn the conclusion that you drew. And
what was that like?
Yeah.
Amazing. And he said, I'll never change the way I feel about you. You're my son. You have to make the decision for you and your family. And he said, I'm too old to think through that. And I said, Dad, I don't want you to think through it. I didn't even want you to read it. I said, the church works for you and Mom, and it should work for you and Mom. They live in Salt Lake. And I said, I just don't want to be a disappointment to you. And he's like, I support you fully. It's, and that was the last. He unfortunately died a year later.
Oh, wow.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
That was the last conversation we ever had about the church.
Wow.
And when I would see him, I would talk to him every week. I called him every week religiously. We were best friends, and he would never bring up the church. He would never ask me about the church. We'd always talk about him, what was going on with him and my mom, what was going on with me and the kids and Jen and my career. And
so much to talk about.
No judgment. And my mom, I knew it hurt my mom, and I tried to really and I had a conversation with my mom in 2014 or in 2015, and it was right before we decided to walk away. She came out and she was asking me well, okay, you don't believe in Jesus, you don't believe in God, you don't believe in anything. And I said, Mom, I've done a lot of research and a lot of study and a lot of thought. And I said, but let me ask you a question. If the church wasn't true, would you want to know? And she said, absolutely not. And I said, okay, then we should never have another conversation about the church. Yeah. I said, you do you. She works in the temple. She's active. She's just believes everything. Yeah. And I said, I don't want to ruin anything I don't want to talk about it. Let's never talk about it again. And we really haven't. In 10 years, we haven't talked about it. But what happened going into 2015, so it's a year later, both the kids are at school. Our daughter's in high school now. We don't really talk about the church. We don't really think about it. We have no contact with the church. And then the Supreme Court ruling happens in 2015 when they...
Obergefell.
Yeah, when they came back and said, the states don't have rights here. The federally gay marriage is allowed. And I watched the way the church responded to it, and it kind of made me mad. They sent out a thing saying, well, even the knowledgeable leaders of the church or the world will make the wrong decisions against God's will and all that. And I was like, how petty. But I didn't say anything. And then a few months later, when the November policy came out, I read that and I went home and I told Jen, I said, I'm out. I'm done. I'm not going to have my name associated with this church.
I agree.
I don't care.
Meaning resigned.
Yes,
yeah,
resigned.
yeah. We took our name. Yeah, I was incensed by that reaction.
Yeah.
So I told the 3 kids, I said, this is what I'm doing. And
Maybe I'll just say, for those who don't know,
Yeah.
we've tried to tell people, basically the church made legal same-sex marriage an act of apostasy, worse than rape or incest or murder, because it required a mandatory excommunication. And then it made it so that children of same-sex married couples couldn't get confirmed, couldn't be baptized, couldn't advance in the priesthood, and only could join when they were 18 if they denounced their parents' marriage.
Right.
That was the November 2015 policy the Mormon Church made in response to the legalization of same-sex marriage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was
And
like,
they
this is the
they
church that
overturned it.
says families are forever, and you're okay, fine. Yeah, the gay people may not be there, but you should still let them be parents and not let make the kids choose not to have those parents anymore.
Yeah.
I was just incensed.
Yeah.
So I sent a note to the bishop, and I never talked to the bishop. I never had any communication with him. She had, but I hadn't. And I just said, hey, she had transferred our records, which I didn't want her to, but she did. And that's fine, whatever. Because again, I didn't care if she was going to church, and they didn't contact me. And so I emailed him and I said, we want to resign, all 5 of us. And I have 5 letters I'm going to send you. And he said, well, will you give me the courtesy of coming over and talking to you? And I said, okay, yeah, fine. I'm good with that. I'd never met the guy. And so it happened over Christmas.
This is Bay Area?
Bay Area.
Okay.
2015, December, over Christmas. And we arranged for them to come over, and our kids were there. So they came over. It was the bishop. It was the first counselor in the stake presidency and the first counselor in the bishopric. All really nice guys. So we're talking, and all 3 of the kids are sitting there. And Josh is sitting to my left up on the arm of the couch where I'm sitting, and he's talking. He's engaged. He's talking about school and all that. And I kind of just outlined a little bit why we were going to leave and stuff like that. And they said, man, you guys are the most amazing family. You guys could bring so much to the church. Please,
we could
consider
really
this.
use you.
We could really use you and your tithing, because we were both working and, making okay money. And so I stopped and I said to the bishop, I said, okay. I said, I've heard you. I said, if you can tell me that there's a place in the church for him, and I pointed to Josh, I said, we'll reconsider.
This is your gay son.
Yeah.
Okay.
I said
the transgender one wasn't transgender yet.
Yeah, I said, if you can tell me that there's a place where he's not going to be single, lonely, celibate, and marginalized by the church, we'll reconsider. And I was expecting church speak. And he sat there for a minute and he looked at the counselor in the stake presidency and the counselor in the bishopric, and he put his head up and he said, I can't tell you that. Mm-hmm. And I
To
said,
his credit.
Yeah, honest.
I said, thank you for being honest. And they got up and I handed them 5 letters and they walked out, and 4 weeks later we got 5 letters from the church. Mm-hmm. And I had individually done all of the letters. And by that time, all the 2 older kids were 18. So they signed theirs. And then I had Sydney, she would have been 12, 13. She signed hers, but then I signed hers for her.
Yeah.
And we were all out and never been back to church since.
Yes.
And so we didn't tell our parents, though, that, because we felt like that was going to be like, they didn't need to know that. Why kick them when they're down? Mm-hmm. We told them later, years later, like a few years ago. I don't remember how it came out, but it came out, and they were disappointed.
Yeah.
because I think they know that the only way that we could ever go back is with first presidency approval, and they'd never allow it. They don't let people back in that are apostates and that resign.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, they do if you, renounce all your
I think it'd be
false
really
beliefs.
hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, renounce our kids and and go crawling back.
Yeah.
But
Not going to happen.
I think it's a process. I think it would be a major process to do that.
So I have a question. Like, it's been 10 years since y'all resigned from the Mormon Church. Mm-hmm. What made you want to apply to be on Mormon Stories 10 years after leaving the church? Like, some would say, okay, few years, maybe 5.
Yeah.
But 10, some would say I'm sure by 10 years, they'd be moved on. They would have stopped even paying attention to podcasts. They would just be living their big, beautiful secular life or religious life, but certainly moved on from even wanting to talk about it, let alone come on a podcast and tell your story. So I'm curious about that.
Yeah.
Well, for me, I feel like a lot of what we went through, some people maybe, especially with LGBTQ kids, and how the church, I still feel like sometimes, even though they've tried to soften it, I still feel like there's that underlying message of not accepting them.
Right.
And so, and I feel like there might be even a dichotomy of feeling like, okay, I love my church, but I love my kid. And I don't know, I'm hoping if I can bring some kind of, or that we can bring some kind of, your kid's you can, and at the time I was still a faithful member of the church while supporting my son and loving my son. Because, as a mama bear, you love your kids above everybody if you're doing it right, I feel like.
Yeah.
And I know the church teaches God first and pretty much church, then spouse, then kids. And I was like, the God that I was taught to love, that, I spent so much time in primary, and the song that always comes out to me is, Jesus said, love everyone, teach them kindly too. When your heart is filled, love others will love you type of thing. And I'm like, the God that I was taught to love and respect and worship would love my gay son. So for anybody to try to tell me any differently, and that the church shouldn't accept this child that was sent down from God, that's just, it doesn't mix.
And your trans child.
And my trans child. Yeah, I always say the gay one because the trans one came out just a couple of years ago.
Yeah, so it was after you
she didn't have to deal with any of that. And I'm so glad she didn't, because she has such a different mindset. She's already had some depression issues and everything. And so I can't even fathom what would have happened with her if she was in the church going through what she's going through now.
That added,
She would have committed suicide.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I
Absolutely.
mean,
that's right.
and
She
it's
struggled
devastating because honestly, I feel like sometimes she's the glue that holds the family together. She's the one that every couple of weeks, like, okay, we're getting together for dinner.
Your trans kid.
My trans kid,
Okay.
yeah. So she, the family is everything for her too. So I can't imagine a church that would try to harm that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I want to talk about your trans kid.
Yeah.
But before that, you said, you're not going to put up with the church that tells you not to love your gay son or whatever. Like, this is just kind of for the sake of dialogue.
Yeah.
An Orthodox Mormon would say, well, the church doesn't tell you not to love your gay son. You love your gay son. The church loves your gay son. Jesus loves your gay son. Down H. Oaks loves your gay son.
Yeah, now they do.
No, they don't.
No.
They still don't.
Let me ask the question.
Yeah.
Sorry.
What a Mormon would say, love everyone. Jesus loves everyone. But we all have to live the law of chastity, and the church is simply asking your gay son to live the law of chastity like everybody else. It's not about love; it's about obeying God's commandments.
It's not,
would
though.
both of you take turns responding
Can
to
I tell
that
person then let you,
response?
because
No, I
you'll be a
wanna
better
go first.
answer. I was
Okay,
going
go.
to say,
You
because
can acknowledge the question is problematic.
was fully planning to do that. He went on his mission for Pete's sake. He was planning to live that life of celibacy. He believed in the church even after he came back from his mission, well longer than he did. So he was going to do that. And, I felt bad for him that was the life he was going to lead. But I was like, look at my wonderful, perfect son that's still going to be a part of the church. What an amazing kid, Yeah. Now it's your turn.
You can't make that correlation. You're comparing apples and oranges. So when I told you when we were dating, we're like these horny teenagers that have an out. March 29th, man, we're good, we're going. They don't have that. So
right.
You're right. They hold them on the same plane that nobody that's not married can have sex, but they can't get married. The church, if the church would even allow some allowance, And in California, I think they do a little bit look the other way, that if there's a married couple, and they can come to church. But overall, the church says if you're out to that, you're heterosexual, gay, whatever you are, you can't have sex according to the church. Well, heterosexual couples have an out to that. They get married. But if a gay couple gets married, they're in deeper water, like you said, with the church.
It's worse.
So it's not a relevant comparison, because the only way to stay happy, healthy, thriving in the church is to be celibate, sad, and lonely.
Which is not a way for them to be happy, healthy,
No,
and
absolutely.
thriving,
No.
even based on John's research.
Oh, absolutely not. No, there's no question.
Okay. So loving the sinner but hating the sin and consigning your kid to a life of loneliness isn't love for you. Is that what you're saying?
I can't. Here's where I struggled, John, like Jen said, we knew early on that he was gay. So like when he told me when he was 14, I wasn't shocked. And I don't know why, he didn't carry himself as whatever. I don't know why it didn't shock me. And so there's no one that can convince me that he wasn't born that way. Yeah. So I'm going to step on my own toes and say, if there is a God, which I don't think there is, but if there is, he created that. So why would you create something that you're going to penalize for a behavior that you've created? And if you try to tell me, well, people say, well, it's no different than somebody that's disabled. I don't believe that. Disabled people don't have the same disadvantages as somebody who's gay, because they have struggles that, a lot of other people don't. And, you limit them based. Someone, like, they use the example, well, maybe it's a trial in life, but God is he gives them the trial, and then he's stopping them purposely, his rule, stopping them from being happy. It's like, I'm going to make you gay, and then I'm going to limit you from being married or being happy or healthy, and I want you to be celibate and lonely your whole life. I can't picture that a God would do that. I just can't. A loving, kind, Christ-like Heavenly Father, because if that is him, I don't want to be with him. I'm going to go hang out with Satan in hell.
Does it change your view at all to know, like you kind of said, that like we know about this guy, Charlie Bird, who was a Cosmo the Cougar at BYU's mascot. He's now a really well-known kind of faithful Mormon public figure. Mm-hmm. He's married to his husband, Ryan. They live in a ward, as far as I know, in Alpine, Utah. They have callings. And the Mormon church just kind of turns their head and looks away. And more, I think the church is allowing same-sex married couples, even though it's supposed to be an act of apostasy and an excommunicable offense. I think they've lost so many people by being viewed as bigots that more and more, less and less is the church excommunicating same-sex married couples, and more they're just turning their head the other way, even though it's still technically a sin. Well, does that change your views about, the church at all?
I feel
and
like
your kids
that
in the
goes
church?
more towards the people, to the credit of the people that are accepting them. I feel like it's more that.
But the leaders could crack down.
And that's exactly my fear, is the leaders, Boy K-Pac or whoever, could suddenly crack down and say, okay, all you people that have been letting these people thrive in your church, hello, that's against our policy. But what are you doing?
Keep in mind, you're one heartbeat away from a total change. And I think when Oaks takes over, he's going to go the opposite direction.
What do you mean?
I think he's going to cramp down.
Oh.
I think Nelson is kind of pushing back because he's seeing the floodgates and he's seeing all of the issues with, we can force it as much as we want, but it's not accepted. People are leaving because of it. There's heterosexual couples who don't have gay kids or gay family members that are leaving over it. I mean, they're like, I'm not going to stick around with a church that's homophobic.
Yeah. Right.
And I think, like I said, we're one heartbeat away, or lack of a heartbeat away from potentially going the other way.
Well, and I honestly feel like at this point, with all the damage the church has done, if they suddenly say, you know what, we now embrace all gay people, you can all do all the things, how's that different from suddenly accepting black people? So black people were evil before 1970, whatever, and now they're okay to have full standing in the church.
But to answer your question, I think it would be amazing if the church could, again, they don't have to change any of their policies, just say, okay, if you're a civilly married gay couple and you're living within the boundaries of that marriage. So you're not committing adultery. You're not out doing crazy stuff. You're in the same boundaries as a heterosexual couple. We may not let you be a bishop. We may not let you be an elders quorum president, but, we'll let you be gospel doctrine teacher. We'll let you do something. We'll let you have a place in the church and we'll accept it.
Like you said,
we're not going to ever let you get married in the temple. That's fine. I don't think they'll ever go to those lengths, and that's fine. They don't have to. But I think they would raise a lot of political capital by doing something like that, by just saying, and I think in California they do. There's a lot of stories of gay couples that are in the church and they're having callings and they're active and they're a lot more accepted, I think, than other places in the country.
I mean, that's happening sometimes in Utah.
Yeah, like you mentioned,
right.
Cosmo.
Yeah.
Okay, so. But then there's the problem of, is it even true, right? Whether or not the church, there's still the problem of, even if the church all of a sudden reversed everything and was super kind to LGBTQ people.
Yeah, they can never go back on what, you can't it's like a house of cards you can never put back. There's still all the doctrinal issues, all the
historical issues.
And
all
I
the
think
historical
too, being kind or allowing, I'm going to say in quotation marks, like allowing a gay couple to participate in a ward, there's still the question of if the policy still states that basically you're evil or less than, and that's why whether that's really healthy. Is that something we would want for our child?
Right,
To
exactly.
be participating, even if it feels kind, but, at a root level, really judges
Right.
you as
But
less than. So
it's also
I agree.
leadership roulette.
yeah.
Because you could have a
That's right.
bishop in a ward that's great, and you could have a bishop in a ward that
Yeah.
won't. And the church, I don't think the church will ever come back and say, okay, if you're married civilly and you're a gay couple and you're falling within these parameters that we hold heterosexual couples, you can be active in the church.
Yeah.
I don't think they'll ever do that. I think what they're doing in cases like you brought up, John, and some of these wards in California, I think they're just looking the other way.
Yeah. Okay, another tough topic. So, we always considered ourselves LGBT allies, at least from 2000 on, but we didn't think much about the transgender kind of stuff. At least I didn't know much about it, really understand it until, people close to us came out as trans. This is after I gave my TED Talk.
Yep.
Encouraging LGBT support. After I did my research, I still didn't understand transgender is totally a separate thing than sexuality.
Right.
Agree.
People totally confuse them. The church still confuses them. The government is talking about, gender and sex as if they're sexuality as if they're one. Anyway, I thought, there was this sort of time period from let's just say 2004 to 2015 and beyond, where it looked like the whole U.S. was kind of just moving in the pro-LGBT direction. And it was just a matter of time before that just became a non-issue. And then the transgender issue became heavily politicized, let's say 4 to 6 years ago. And once it got politicized, it's almost like half of the country has kind of almost declared psychological war on the transgender community. And that's been really hard. And I just want to say, there's probably a big chunk of our viewers and listeners that probably wouldn't feel very affirming of transigender, people or transitioning. So do y'all want to just talk briefly about anything about what that was like for y'all to have a kid? And you don't have to talk about it, but if you want to, just to give your perspective for those who are either not feeling great about that or confused about it or want to learn more.
Well, for me, it was almost harder than our other son coming out gay because, with the transgender population, they don't like their old self, okay? So her name is Nova. She came out, and so I felt like I had to kind of mourn my son a little bit. And I hate to make it sound like it's a bad thing, because Nova and I have always been close from her whole life. We've always been close, and we still are. She likes to joke around that she's my favorite kid, and I always just say whoever's doing whatever at this time is my favorite kid. It changes. That's how parents are. But she and I, as a rule, have always been very close. And like I said, we still are. But I had to mourn the son that I was losing, And to her credit, she allows that. You know, she allows if we make a mistake and accidentally call her Jordan. She allows we might accidentally call her he, you know, and it's been a couple of years, but sometimes a slip will come. And like I even at one point talked about getting a tattoo, you know, have the flower tattoos. And they always have 2 flowers for each month. And I asked her permission. I said, if I get that, I kind of want to do both flowers for your birth month because I want one to represent the little boy I raised and then one to represent the woman that you've become. And she was so good about it. She's like, I appreciate that you asked me first. And yeah, that's a great idea, which I think is so amazing because there are so many people that do have such self-loathing for the gender that they don't feel that they identify with. And I love that she respects the fact that, yeah, I raised her as a boy for 28 years. But, you know, and I shouldn't cry because I feel like I'm over the mourning part. Now I just always am, okay, when she finishes transition, is she still going to be okay? Is she going to get out of it what she's hoping to get out of it as she finishes the transition? But, you know, my mom still worries about me and I'm not in my 20s anymore or my teen years, you know, so I'll worry about her and all my other kids until the day they die. It's
You
just
die.
whatever
Hopefully
issue.
you die first.
That's right. And until, you know, whatever issue each child has. But right now that's her issue is she's transitioning and is she going to be okay when the process is complete? Is she getting out of it what she hopes she'll get out of it? I don't know. I'm rambling.
Well,
I'll shut
for me, I get it's a different issue than, you know, I think we got to a point where it's like gay people are just accepted. Just let it, you know, it's like the meme. If you don't like gay marriage, don't have one. You know, just stay out of their business. I think the trans is a little bit different because it can be very polarizing because, you know, and I've talked when she came out, she told us, and I get it. I will tell you, I don't understand it. I didn't understand it. I was just like, okay, we didn't see this one coming. But she had been depressed. She'd suffered from depression. And she told us that she felt like a lot of the depression and the mental health was because of this. And so we went to dinner with her and our older son, and they told us, and we're like, okay, whatever. And I called her and I said, I want to have dinner with you. And so I went, picked her up, and we went to dinner. And I've always had the relationship that I could talk to him. And I said, just make sure you're 100% sure before you do anything that you can't come back on. I said, I don't care if this helps you with your mental health and helps you be the person that you need to be. I don't care. And I think, you know, we've got that. And she's not the kind of person that's, you know, advocating for surgeries for 6-year-olds or competition in sports. And I won't go there. I understand why that's so polarizing. What I'm hoping eventually it can get to is let trans people be trans people. You don't have to like it. Just accept it. You know, I don't try to question it. I don't try to ask questions if it's the right thing, if it's what drove it. If it's going to make her happy and that's how she's going to live her life, then that's fine with me. I don't care. I would rather, you know, I'd rather a trans kid or a gay kid than a dead kid. And that was something that I always worried about with her because she did have mental health issues. Like I said, when Josh came home from his mission and went to school, I didn't worry about him anymore because he was our normal kid. He was just, I shouldn't use the word normal. He was what he was before.
His normal.
He'd gotten over all this.
Right.
And so with Nova, she struggled a lot with mental health, and it worried me. I was afraid we were going to get a call that, you know, that she didn't want to do it anymore. And then when she came out as trans, I think she still struggles, but not to the degree that she used to. And if that's what it takes, then I'm okay with that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's obviously true, better a trans kid than a dead kid, but better
Absolutely.
a trans kid than a depressed, sad, miserable,
Also.
unhappy
Exactly.
kid.
We want her to
Also.
live her best life and be happy.
That's right.
And
I mean,
That's right.
When I was seeing a therapist about, you know, understanding this issue myself, I remember feeling that same thing about, well, what if they make a decision that they can't come back from?
Yep.
And the therapist said, maybe they will.
Yeah.
But that's not your job.
Right. Your job is to just support them with whatever they're going through at that time.
I think so. And also, haven't there been decisions we've made
But we
that
all.
we haven't been able to come back from? Isn't
Right.
that like actually part of being human?
It really
absolutely.
is. It really is. Yeah.
Yeah. And, and the therapist said if they end up regretting a decision they make, they'll, we'll get to that point, and then we'll make decisions at that point.
Right.
And that just wasn't the case.
At all.
Yeah.
Right.
The reverse was true. So,
And so now I think, we're really close to all three of our kids. They live, the two older kids live together in an apartment. They're both, one's a software engineer, one's a biochemist.
Still in Nebraska, or
No.
Now they're in
20 minutes away.
Yeah,
from
they live
us.
near us.
Oh, in
So we
Bay
get
Area.
together
Yeah,
like every
so
other week.
we
for
see 'em
sure.
every
so
other
they're living
week.
a healthy, happy life.
Yeah, and they go on vacation with us. We go to dinner with them. We have them over to the house. It's just a normal.
right.
Our older
normal
one has a
family.
boyfriend that I love to death. We can, hopefully it always
Yeah.
still works out, because honestly, I couldn't choose better for him.
Yeah.
Right.
But you always
so-
hope for an in-law, right? That you
Yeah.
can like
Yeah.
and appreciate.
He comes to dinner too, and
Yeah.
like we usually go to Hawaii as a family once a year, and they look forward to going with us, and we pay for it, of course, because we don't want to. We want them to feel like we don't want the burden on them, and so we enjoy that time. It's an opportunity to get together and get them kind of isolated from everything else and just spend family time together. And so the five of us go. We do stuff like she said, we go to dinner every other week at least. Sometimes they come over to the house. Sometimes if she's working on a weekend and I'm bored, I'll text Nova or Josh and be like, hey, what are you guys doing? You want to go to dinner? I'll come down and hang out. And so they're in a good place. Like Jen said, I can't possibly fathom having to have navigated the transition with Nova around the church, because it was so hard for a gay son that we, not one time in ever a second did we ever think that we weren't going to support him.
Yeah.
That wasn't even I don't understand people that do that. I don't understand how people cannot just love their kids. Your kids don't always do what you want. They don't always turn out what you want. But we, like Jen said, we were super lucky. Our kids are amazing. They're smart. And having to navigate that with Josh was hard. And then we got out of it. And then, 7-8 years later, it was a lot easier with Nova, because it was like, okay, I've kind of fallen into that category that, you say, a lot of your listeners say, why do people go from, strong LDS to atheist? And I have a theory for that, but I'm kind of in that boat.
What's your theory?
So for me, I was converted. Temple recommend, leadership callings, all this, and I just wasn't a fundamental about having to be. I didn't believe that was the way God wanted us to operate. We went to church every week, but when I fell away, I took a microscope to the church. I studied everything. I read the entire CS letter. I read the scriptures. I read the Book of Mormon. I read the Doctrine and Covenants to prove to myself. I read all of Mormon Think. I did everything I could and drew the conclusion that this is not. So I took that same filter and I applied it to a belief in Jesus. I applied it to a belief in God, and I came to the conclusion that I can't support that there's anything out there. And if there is, I can't reconcile who he is with, we lived in India, and I had the chance to travel. I've been to 60 countries. I've seen everything: poverty in Africa, abject poverty in India. And I can't understand how a God would allow that and then allow some of the worst people in the world to thrive. And it's like, for me, it's not good enough to say, well, they'll get theirs in heaven. That's not. And so I just kind of drew that conclusion that works for me. I don't care what other people believe. I don't try to convince people I'm right or wrong. I think she still, on some level, at least believes something, and that's fine. It's not my point to change it.
Yeah.
But I think that helped me a lot because my main concern for Nova was her. It wasn't, I'm worried about God. I'm worried about what the bishop is going to say. I'm worried about what the ward's going to say. I couldn't care less about any of that. I didn't feel like that was a ramification. And I think, I think to their credit, we probably didn't say it enough, but the way our parents have handled this transition from a gay kid, us leaving the church, us resigning from the church, which was it was all an impact on them, and we tried to be sensitive to it. They've been absolute rock stars. And, you know, when we told them that Nova was trans, they don't understand it, and they'll admit they don't understand it. But they just don't question
my
it.
dad gets tears in his eyes still when he talks about how much he loves his grandkids, and that he hopes that they understand, you know, they can feel it. And it's harder because we don't live near them. Our kids have a different relationship than my brother's kids because they've been able to be with their grandparents growing up. And so my dad...
Still close.
Huh?
They're still close. I mean,
Yeah,
they're
still
my mom,
close,
and
but
my mom
they
calls
call.
them.
But I think my dad still worries that since they didn't grow up with him.
Right.
But yeah,
But
I think
don't.
that is so rare for your children to have grandparents that are still not just the church thing, but like all the different like expressions of what a child could be. To have grandparents that are love first.
Yeah.
Love first.
No, absolutely.
I do think it's rarer. It's really
I
a
think
beautiful
we're very
thing.
fortunate. It's probably why
Yeah.
we're like we are, is because we had stellar parents. You know,
That we're still to this day.
I mean, we
they're-
still do
they're
have
still,
them. But yeah,
you know,
they're
very
all
supportive.
amazing.
And, you know,
Yeah.
my mother-in-law likes to argue about the church, and we debate about the church and about politics and stuff, but we do it in a fun way. She knows how I feel, and I know how she feels. And she understands some of the flaws with the church, but she overall believes the church is true, and that's her right. And my father-in-law doesn't say much, and with my mom, we just never talk about the church, and it's a good place with all three of them.
So the moral of today's story is, if you're a really, really good Mormon parent, your kids and grandkids will leave the church and be super happy.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. I still feel bad about that for them. I hope when my parents see this, they don't get mad I say this, but when I was visiting my mom one year, they took me out to where their headstone is. They were all proud that they had done their headstone so that when they do pass, we don't have to worry about it. And I have a little sister that had died as a baby, so, you know, their plot's right by hers. And on the back of it, it has mine and my brother's names and our children's names. And then under that, families are forever. And like right after they had shown me that, I brought up how I had left the church. I mean, like how I had signed the letter. And honestly, my mom is like, she doesn't cry over anything else. I think probably one of the first times I've ever seen my mom cry, because it kind of hit her that we were the apostates that we are.
Yeah.
But, you know, she got over that, and you know, she's back to just, you know, you guys are living a good life. You're doing what you need to do to be good people. I figure, you know, and the way she says it, God's going to figure it out in the end.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I said that to her the other day, because I feel bad for my mom, because my mom is a card-carrying member. She's all in. She works in the temple, and my sister passed away 2 years ago, and so it's just me and my mom. My dad died, and now my sister, and so it's just me and my mom. And I try to do nice things I can for my mom. I help her financially if she needs it. I talk to her all the time. I have a great relationship, but I do feel like it's like everything else that my dad was really big on. Like, I wish my dad would have lived long enough to see me accomplish some of the goals I had career-wise. Like when I became CFO of a company, that was something that he always believed in me more than I believed in myself. And that would have been really amazing, I think, for him, because it would have been an I told you so. Other than that, it doesn't really matter. But I think with my mom, I feel bad, because it's like no matter what we accomplish in life, there's always a but. You know, like I called my mom and said, hey, I've been trying for this job at this company, and I got it, and it's amazing. I love it. She's like, oh, that's great. But I think in the back of her mind, there's always a but. It's like, you're not a member, and there's consequences for that. And I think the way she reconciles it is to say, you know what, God's loving, he's compassionate, he'll figure it out. And I said to my mother-in-law the other day, I said, you know, the way I work it is I'm not worried if there's a God. Because if there is, I feel like we've lived good lives. We try to do the right thing. We've always, you know, done everything we can for our kids without enabling them. You know, we've always taught them right from wrong. They're all career motivated. Like I said, our daughter's going to graduate from University of Michigan in May, and she's got career aspirations. They're kind people. They're compassionate. And so I'm not afraid if there is a God. Then I'll say, here's the things I did. Here's the way I live my life. And I think if there is a God that's all the things that people say, he's going to understand how people could struggle with the disconnect to believe in him. Mm-hmm. That's the way I'm going to kind of say is I'm not afraid if there is a God, because I feel like I could stand in front of him and say, hey, I did the best I could. And, that's if I'm going to be judged and cast down to hell for where my ass sat on a Sunday, then I don't want to be with that person anyways. Mm-hmm. So.
I have a question about how you would talk about how, if the way you feel like you love and what love is has changed over the years, or has it stayed the same? Do you feel like you kind of always had it? And then the follow-up question is what family means to you now.
I feel like I may not have understood it as much, like as when we first got married, as I have as we've grown. And anybody who's in a monogam, a relationship knows that you're going to have bumps and bruises and trials that you can overcome and everything. And so going through that, I love the fact that I can say that we've grown together. I mean, mm-hmm. I was 20 years old, and I look at 20-year-olds now, and they're children. Yeah. And when I was 20, I've been like, I'm an adult. But the life experience that we've had, I was a child, and I literally grew up with this man, and we've overcome so much. And then even as a parent, that changes through time. You go from these little infants that can't do anything, and then you watch them grow into their own adulthood and be their own people. And just like I'm sure our parents had to do for us, we may not be doing what they had envisioned for us. They expected us, I'm sure, to be on the top of their celestial cake as well, but just like I did. But they still love us anyway, regardless of where we've gone in life, what we've done. Yeah. And I don't want to say in any way, because there never was an anyway. I love my son anyway, even though he's gay. I love my daughter anyway, even though that was never a thing. The love is just there, it grows the more I get to know them as people, because I can appreciate them now as adults and who they've grown into. Mm. Right. And I think that's what I've learned, is that love is ever changing and gets stronger as time goes by. Yeah. I don't know about you.
I think for me, when we moved back to California, I wanted to do something constructive. And so I started volunteering at San Quentin prison, and I learned a lot about the parole process. And in California, if you're doing a life sentence for murder or whatever, you have to go before a 3-panel parole commission group, and it's hard to get out. And so I taught myself a lot about how to do that and how to work with inmates. And I've got some people that I've helped get out that served 40 years, that like the people that watch our animals right now that stay in our house. I helped him get out, and I started working in the women's prisons and working with women that were trying to negotiate this alone, because it's not lawyers that can help you. It's people who understand how the system works. And I saw women who had spent 25, 30 years incarcerated for murder, whose parents would visit them every week, and they didn't condone what they did. They didn't blame society. They didn't blame anything. They take accountability. You did this, but they never turned their backs on and so that's always been something for me is I don't have to love everything about my kids, although I think I do. I love who they are, but I never, and it's just like with her, it's like when she was still going to church, and we got to a point early on where we couldn't talk about it. We would argue about it, because I'd be like, how do you not just see this? It's so stupid. And she'd be like, I don't want to talk about it. You're deceived. You're reading the wrong thing. And I just thought, okay, this can either ruin our marriage or it cannot. And we just, we had a lot of things that we loved about each other, common interests, stuff like that. And so we focused on that. But I don't think it's been any different for me. I think it's been, it's looking at our parents, and our parents, my sister, like I said, had a lot of problems in her life. And my mom and dad had every reason to turn their back on her, because she did some pretty bad stuff, and they never did. And I don't think you should enable a kid, but, I think the way that the way for me, it's like, I believe this is it. We're done after this. There's nothing. I could be wrong, but I live my life like that. I don't want to hope that there's some reconciliation after we die where I can, reconcile with a family member, be it parents, siblings, kids,
Yeah.
I don't want to hope that because I didn't do it in this life that I can do it in another life. So I think I view things a little bit differently, that you got one life, who knows, I was telling Jen, I have people that I graduated with that there were like in the last 6 months, there's been like 5 people from my graduating class that have died.
From your high school graduating
Yeah,
class?
from my high school graduating class for various reasons. And it's like, who knows if you're going to be here tomorrow? I don't want to live my life hoping that I can make up for it somewhere else.
Right. Okay. And then I'm going to just ask one last time the family question.
What does family mean?
What does family mean to you now? When you think of your family, when you think of those times, you go to Hawaii, is that what you said?
Yeah.
Yearly?
Yeah.
Yeah. What does it mean to you now? Because I think that's kind of a main theme.
Yeah.
It's appreciating how we are as a family. We're very cohesive as a family. We get along really well. We all have a stupid sense of humor that we all understand, and we take jabs at each other. And our 2 older kids are kind of the less serious, and our daughter's a little bit more serious. And it's just the dynamic that we just love. We love everything individual about each of them, but collectively as a family, we get along real well. We've purposely tried to nurture that. You have to actively work at it. It doesn't happen. It's, we could let things get in the way or and we didn't do that. And I think by, like I said earlier, I think if I'd allowed, if I'd have just told the mission president, you know what? Yeah, you're right. Just let him go. How would that have looked to my son who's reaching out to me saying, I need your help? And, had I just said, no way, just fall in, church speak, the mission president has this, he's got revelation. I think my son would have thought, okay, my dad doesn't have my back, and maybe he really doesn't support me as much as he does. And it's, again, it's not enabling. I don't believe in enabling kids. I think you need to teach them and provide opportunities for them and stuff like that. But also, I think all 3 of our kids know that they're loved unconditionally. And if they ever did something that we didn't agree with, that's fine. We don't have to agree with it, but they're unconditionally loved. And I think our parents have shown that despite everything we've thrown at them, they show that. There's no question in my mind that they're probably disappointed because of the way but that disappointment doesn't flow over into any actions of the way they treat us. And I mean, even my mom is like I said, she's hardcore, but I have no question that she loves us, so.
Sounds about right. Yeah. It's that unconditional love that we've been given and that we give.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I feel like, even the kids have it, they'll probably argue with each other more than they would us, because that's kids, but
Yeah.
but ultimately family's got your back.
Yeah.
All right.
Beautiful.
Well, Kevin and Jennifer Lundquist, it's, family over church, family over religion, family over dogma, family over kind of everything, maybe.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that okay?
Yeah.
I like it.
Does that sound good, Margie? You like that, Margie?
We honor your love
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank
and
you.
the journey of love that you've had to take.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. But before we close, can I say one thing?
Yeah.
So I brought you guys a gift.
Oh, what? Is this for on air or after?
It's right there.
Okay. All right.
It was my
I'm
first,
nervous now.
first shelf. No, this is a first copy of the Articles of Faith.
Oh.
It's the first edition.
Okay.
And do you know what the significance of that is, right?
No. Tell me. James
okay.
E. Talmage, right?
James E. Talmage.
Okay.
They say he wrote this in the temple. And I read this a long time ago. And I got to be able to read it now. But he basically, this is on the 3 degrees of glory.
Oh.
It's reasonable to believe in the absence of direct revelation by which, okay, read this paragraph. Just read that paragraph.
Okay.
I have my sharp
see.
contacts in.
I can see it if you can.
By which almost absolute knowledge of the matter could be acquired, that he, in accordance with God's plan of eternal sorry, I'm not wearing my glasses. Progression, advancement from grade to grade within any kingdom and from kingdom to kingdom will be provided for. But if the recipients of a lower glory be enabled, to advance, surely the intelligence of the higher rank shall not be stopped in their progress. And thus we may conclude that the degree and the grades will ever characterize the kingdom of our God. Eternity is progressive, perfection is relative, and the essential feature of God's living purpose is its associated power of eternal increase.
Whoa, I think I know where you're going there.
What he's saying in here is that there's the ability, if you are assigned the celestial kingdom, to bump up, to eventually make it to the celestial kingdom. Yeah. The reason the first edition is significant is because they took it out after the second edition.
They did, yeah.
And so this is a 1901 copy. It's the second printing of the first edition.
Dang,
and I thought I'd give it to you guys to have.
Thank you.
I marked the page, but it's just interesting. I read that a long time ago, and I thought, when you're on your mission, at least for me, Talmage was like the one author that you could read besides the standard works. You could read Jesus of Christ. You could read Articles of Faith. Mm-hmm. And somebody told me about that, and I used to collect old books, like church books. And somebody told me about it, and I didn't believe it. So I found this book, and I bought it, and I read it, and I thought, it's another thing that they changed, and maybe it would be nice if the church was true and Talmage was right, that maybe in a billion years, if you didn't quite make it in this world,
or 3
billion, whatever,
or 3 years,
6, well, let's be honest. If you make it to the terrestrial kingdom, and I think this is probably what my mom believes, is that eventually through enough penance and saying enough Hail Emma Smiths, you can make it to the celestial kingdom eventually. So I had this book in my drawer, and I thought you'd enjoy it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll just share with you something fun I learned just this week. I was going through some of the Tanner's old stuff, and it's related to Talmage. Mm-hmm. Did you know that in the mid-20th century, James E. Talmage decided that we needed a version of the Doctrine and Covenants that didn't have, all the irrelevant sections and the stuff that really wasn't useful or helpful. Wow. So Talmage put together a condensed version of the Doctrine and Covenants.
I needed that.
Took out dozens of sections. Guess what section he removed?
What
132.
He removed D&C 132.
Of course.
And so he released it. And then the fundamentalists had a huge backlash. And you wouldn't think the church would care.
No.
But they did.
Wow.
And so they stopped printing. But Talmage did an edited version of the Doctrine and Covenants. I didn't know that.
I didn't either.
Yeah,
I would have loved that because.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I was amazed that because if you look at the next printing is 1910, and the next edition, and they took it all out. They took everything out. Then they even actually said that there's the new wording is that you would think that, but there's no provision for that God would allow that. You're basically stuck.
And of course, that's because in the mind of Mormon church leaders, if you don't have that threat of being stuck in the wrong kingdom based on what you do in this life, then you won't join the church and stay faithful to the end.
You're giving people an out. It's like, well, I can wait a billion years. It's fine. I'll hang out with Hitler in the terrestrial kingdom, and then eventually I'll get up there.
So they had to fix that to keep people paying tithing and
But if Talmage was so inspired, how they said that he was like...
He was a prophecy and revelator, special witness of Christ, right?
Right. So, which was right. I don't know.
Well, fun. Well, thanks again, Kevin and Jennifer Lundquist, for coming on Mormon Stories.
Thank you for having us.
It's been so great for you to share your sacred family experiences with all of us.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
It's really nice to meet you guys, too.
Yeah. And Margie, thanks for being with us today.
Yes, of course.
Great.
Also, just want to thank our donors that make all this possible. We literally couldn't do it without you. So if you're a monthly donor, thank you. If you're not, and you value this type of content, we would love your support at mormonstories.org. All you got to do is go there, click on the donate button, and become a monthly donor, and we'll keep creating this content. Please subscribe to this channel on YouTube, on Facebook. Please like and comment. That all helps. I want to thank Brooklyn and Julia and Gerardo and Maven and Margie and everyone at the Open Stories Foundation, including our board, that make what we do possible. Thank our viewers and listeners. And just want to remind everyone, if you want to be a guest like this wonderful couple, like the Lundquist, if you want to be a guest on Mormon Stories, all you got to do is what they did. Click on the apply to be a guest button on the website at mormonstories.org. Fill out the application, record a quick 3-minute video. Margie will review it. She'll run it by me. And if it's a good fit, we can't accept all applicants, but if it is a good fit, we'd love to have you on. We're always looking for new, interesting stories. And we always love your feedback at mormonstories@gmail.com. Anything else?
I don't think so.
All right. Thanks again, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
And be good to each other. Be kind to each other. We'll see you all again soon on another episode of Mormon Stories Podcast, Family over Church, Religion, Dogma. Every time. See ya.